That just shows the lack of respect for the work that public service workers perform in Washington, D.C. and across the country. And I think that the Democrats have to be very strong, and they are being strong. Harry Reid, the leader of the Senate, is saying that won't even be considered in the Senate. That's what he should say. I think President Obama is being very strong about this. And this is a signature piece of legislation for the president, and he can't back off.
Working Virginia Update, produced by Workers Independent News. I'm Doug Cunningham.
This update made possible by the Office and Professional Employees International Union, ensuring fair treatment, fair wages, and benefits for thousands of working Virginians. Online at opeiu.org.
Can we welcome the city of San Antonio, Texas to the 21st century? I'm attorney Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In early September, the San Antonio City Council held its vote on a proposed ordinance that would prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in the city, including in public accommodations and in making city contracts. Republican heavyweights such as Senator Ted Cruz and the Attorney General Greg Abbott, who is running for governor, blasted the proposal. The basis for the opposition? Alleged denial of religious-based beliefs of the right to discriminate. The Associated Press story on the San Antonio City Council fight quoted Dee Villarubia, a 67-year-old former Air Force officer whose landlord evicted her 2 years ago because she is gay, as saying, "When I say the Pledge of Allegiance, I say justice for some, because there has been an asterisk on that part of the pledge that means not me. Today," said the former Air Force officer, "I would take the asterisk away and now finally say justice for all." The ordinance, you see, was adopted by the City Council, 8 in favor, 3 opposed. And by passing this ordinance, San Antonio joined 180 other cities across the United States that will not permit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU.
Is anybody going to San Antonio?
Because freedom can't protect itself.
Packers.
Vikings. We come from different places.
Uptown.
Downtown. We come to different conclusions.
Half empty.
Half full. But when we live united, we make a real difference in the building blocks of life. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly so do our communities. Real change won't happen without you.
Live United.
So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
There is a new front in the war on America's middle class, and it is happening at the University of California today.
AFSCME 3299's Todd Stenhouse, the University of California, is imposing retirement cuts on 22,000 workers that will cost more than $1 billion in increased health insurance premiums when they retire. Stenhouse says this is happening while the university is fiercely defending golden parachute-style retirement plans for executives, while cutting retiree health care for workers who average $35,000 to $55,000 a year.
UC is been hell-bent and focused on protecting the most outrageous and unsustainable executive pension system, frankly, of any public employee I've ever heard of. There are over 2,000 UC pensioners who are making between $100,000 and $300,000 a year in terms of payouts. And that money is being subsidized by cuts to the system's lowest wage workers, by skyrocketing tuition, by cutting corners on patient care. And it's wrong. It is fundamentally wrong.
AFSCME 3299 is vowing to fight hard against these imposed retiree health care cuts. The Dodd-Frank wage gap rule finally passes through the SEC. Jesse Russell reports.
A controversial rule came out of the Securities and Exchange Commission Wednesday that would require public companies to reveal the wage gap between CEOs and employees. While CEO compensation is already public information, the rule would take it the additional step of requiring companies to calculate the median employee wage. According to SEC Chair Mary Jo White, companies will have flexibility on how they calculate that median wage. According to information gathered by Salary.com, on average, CEOs of the S&P 500 companies received $12.3 million in compensation for 2012. According to data compiled by the AFL-CIO, that's 354 times the average wages of workers for 2012. The rule came out of the Dodd-Frank financial reform in 2010, and since that time has lingered as the SEC fine-tuned it. The rule passed by a 3-2 vote.
On the 5-year anniversary of the Keystone XL pipeline application permit, Sean McGarvey, president of North America's Building Trade Unions, says that the project has been under review now for more than twice as long as it would take to build the pipeline. The Building Trades Unions say there will be no significant impacts to most natural resources on the pipeline route. The unions say the economic benefit of building the pipeline is clear, as thousands of jobs will be created. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
American citizens everywhere are demanding and supporting speedy and complete action.
Broadcasting from the We Act Radio studios in Washington, D.C. Heard live across the nation, this is Take Action News with David Shuster.
Many of the world's great movements of thought and action have flowed from the work of a single man.
There is work to be done. The state of our economy calls for action, bold and swift, and we will act.
We will take action when action is required.
Hello, this is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch here all afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Special thanks to Pete and Rachel on controls and our affiliate WCPT out in Chicago. Chicago's Progressive Talk. On Monday, an armed gunman took 12 lives in the latest mass shooting. Former naval reservist and defense contractor Aaron Alexis had a history of reported mental illness and had sought care from the Department of Veterans Affairs. On Tuesday morning, Alexis opened fire on the Navy Yard complex in Washington, D.C. Sadly, this is only the latest in what is becoming an all too common occurrence in the United States. Yesterday, Congress once again addressed an imminent government shutdown. The Republican-controlled House of Representatives passed a stopgap measure to fund the government through December. The vote was along party lines. However, the bill in its current form is not likely to pass the Senate, as it also undermines Obamacare funding. This is just the latest instance in which House Republicans have attempted to cut government spending by holding hostage the programs that millions of Americans rely on. Another bill passed by the House this week would deeply cut the food stamp program known as SNAP. Later in the show, we'll be talking to In These Times Cole Strangler about the conservative ideology undermining efforts to underpinning the efforts to dismantle the critical welfare safety net. Up next, we'll be joined by Radley Balko, the author of The Rise of the Warrior Cop, where we'll discuss the increasing militarization of America's police force, who's behind it, and why Americans should be concerned about this trend. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. Stick around, and we'll be right back.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, And even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune into the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio.
Friends, David Shuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast D.C.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. Be sure to check me out online, karlfrisch.com. Connect with me on Twitter and Facebook. Also, any other social media program, I'm there. Connect with the show, takeactionnews.com. You've probably noticed that our police look more and more like they're military as opposed to the cops that you may have seen on television when you were growing up. It is not by happenstance. Joining me now to talk about his new book, The Rise of the Warrior Cop, is Radley Balko. He's a senior writer at Huffington Post. Radley, thanks for joining me. All right. So, as I was saying, you look at police departments, they've got military vehicles, it looks like. They've got, just about all the accoutrement that you would expect our men and women in uniform to be using overseas and when they're deployed in military actions. As somebody who grew up with a father in the sheriff's department, it's rather strange. I mean, my father did not drive a tank home, when he came home at night from work. He was a LA County sheriff for 35 years. I think the most militarized I ever saw him was in a bulletproof jacket. And that was pretty tame as far as this stuff goes. He wasn't, moving around LA in some kind of battering ram vehicle to knock down buildings. It was, shoe leather and donuts. Radley's got this new book that kind of explores. We're waiting for him to get back on the line with us. The Rise of the Warrior Cop, where these militarized police forces come from, and why they're so prevalent now. I mean, you see, think of the Boston bombing during the marathon. As soon as the police were, called, it looked like an occupation of sorts. some would say that it's not necessarily a bad thing, that we want to be able to respond to these types of situations. But, this does have a certain cost. I mean, what impact does it have on communities when they see what is essentially a military force in their midst every day, all day long? I'm sure it can't be too, I'm sure it's very unsettling for folks that encounter these police forces every day of their life. I mean, imagine if you were walking home from school or coming home from work, and every day you saw the local police department's tank sitting out front of wherever you lived or worked. I imagine it would be very difficult to deal with. And we're seeing more and more of these stories about the way that police respond to different things as a military force, whether or not they're going to be using drones as local police departments. I think that's a concern that many people have. Obviously not the kind of drones that our government is using with the ability to have military strikes, but drones nonetheless, that can fly around being undetected. And where is that line drawn? Where do we say that is not what a police department does, that is what a military does? And where do we say that that's not appropriate? I think we all want our police to be safe. They're public servants as much as anybody else, perhaps more since they're putting their lives on the line. But at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that not only are they safe, but they're capable of keeping us safe. And a lot of these local police officers are not trained to use these types of weapons, to use these types of vehicles like you would be in the military. So we hope to get Radley on the line soon, and we'll be back after this.
Listening to Take Action News on We Act Radio, produced at the studios of WPWC 1480 AM in Washington, D.C., your nation's capital.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
You know, this used to be a good neighborhood. Now it's a mess, you know?
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. We seem to have resolved our technical difficulties. If you're just joining us, we've been talking about the militarization of our local police forces And joining me is the author of The Rise of the Warrior Cop. It's a book that you will want to pick up, is Radley Balko. Radley, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, so explain to us the concept for your book. I imagine at some point you saw local police departments driving around in tanks and looking like they're ready to, embark into Fallujah, and thought there's probably a story here.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a trend that's been going on for a couple of generations, but it's a problem of equipment. We've been giving police departments across the country military equipment, surplus gear from the Pentagon. Department of Homeland Security has been giving out grants to buy this stuff, and we're talking tanks and armored personnel carriers and helicopters and guns and so forth. But it's also tactics. So the police departments are using this stuff to form SWAT teams, and there's been a massive increase in the number of SWAT teams and raids over the last 30 years, from about a few hundred per year in the late 70s to a few thousand per year by the early 80s to 50,000 per year by 2005. And then it's also just about mindset. I think even beyond the SWAT team, I think police today have been conditioned, mostly by politicians, to see themselves as soldiers and neighborhoods as battlefields, and see their jobs not as keeping the peace or protecting people's rights, but as fighting various wars, whether it's war on drugs or war on crime or war on terrorism.
Well, it's certainly interesting. My father was an LA County sheriff for 35 some odd years. I never remember, seeing my dad pull up from work in a tank. He had an undercover cop car. It was a Monte Carlo. It was about as 1980s, 90s cop as you can get. And the stories he told were not ones that sounded militaristic. They sounded very much like your typical cop show from the 70s, 80s, 90s, He was even in what is the equivalent, for a period in the sheriff's department. He was in the equivalent of what is known, in most police departments as the SWAT teams. But you didn't see it on TV every day. I mean, now when you see cops on television doing something, if they're in a large number, there's always military vehicles involved, and they're always dressed, head to toe in black with whatever, fancy weapons.
Camouflage. Yeah, or camouflage, which always
right.
I find interesting. I mean, there's really no reason for...
No, come on now. A criminal looks at a group of cops moving in camouflage, and they don't think police, they think moving forest.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no reason for that other than to mimic the military.
Right.
Raiding forests, right?
Exactly. So what... You mentioned that it's kind of evolved over time. It certainly seems to have picked up the pace in the last 10 years significantly.
Yeah, well, it's been the last. I think it goes back to about the early 1980s when Ronald Reagan and his administration really took the war on drugs metaphor and made it very literal. They brought the National Guard in to start fighting the drug war. At one point, they even wanted to bring in active duty military troops. It's one of the few bad ideas from the 80s that didn't make it into law when it comes to crime. But they also created, these anti-drug grants from the federal government, which have incentivized police departments to put, a much higher priority on drug crimes than they do anything else. So, if you have a SWAT team now, you can keep them in reserve and wait for one of the emergency sorts of situations where SWAT teams are appropriate, like a hostage taking or a bank robbery or so forth. Or you can start sending your SWAT team out on drug raids and actually start generating revenue for your police department. So, the federal government has played a big role in this, from supplying the equipment to...
Now, when you say bringing in revenue for your police department, that's because when they seize assets and money from drug dealers or kingpins, whatever, gangs, it becomes property of the county or the city that the police department's in, right?
Well, the money goes back to the police department itself in most places.
Yeah.
But they don't, you don't even have to be charged with a crime, much less convicted, to have your property taken. You can be, in fact, most people are never charged with a crime. The police make some loose connection to drugs, they get to take it, and then it's up to you to go to court to win it back. And a lot of times the cost of going to court to win it back can exceed the value of the property itself. But also, I was specifically there referring to these federal grants that go just toward fighting the drug war. So, if you send your SWAT team out to apprehend a murderer or, a rapist or an armed burglar, there's no federal money tied to that. If you send them out to arrest a bunch of low-level pot dealers or pot smokers, even there is federal money connected to that. So there is a strong incentive to use SWAT teams for increasingly less serious crimes.
Well, and then I think of the tactics too. I mean, stop and frisk in New York has a lot of similarities to the way that people are treated in Afghanistan and were treated in Iraq, with military just stopping anybody on the street, searching them, searching their homes, etc. Are these these tactics? I know that they do have special programs that police officers take, where they get trained in the ways of these types of skills. Is that something that's happening more often too?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think just generally, police have. I think they've been just conditioned again to see themselves more as soldiers fighting some sort of war, but also, police officers are. They've gone from walking beats to driving around in squad cars, and what that has done is it's put a barrier. I think both literally in terms of the car, but also psychologically between them and the communities they serve. So, if you're on a beat, you're seeing people every day, you're talking to people, you're getting to know people in your neighborhood. But if you're in a squad car, the only time you're actually getting out and interacting with people is when something's going wrong, when you're confronting someone, or when there's some sort of dispute. And, what that does is it really creates a lot of animosity. The only interaction that police officers are having with these communities, and the communities are having with the officers, are negative. So, if you're a police officer, that makes for a pretty crappy work day, right? I mean, if your only interaction with other people over the course of the day is negative, you're not going to love your job. But for the communities, it also, it sort of makes them feel like they're having this outside force sort of imposed upon them, or that they're, being occupied. Whereas, under the idea of community policing, cops would walk beats, they would go to neighborhood meetings, they would know the names of the principals of the schools on their beats, and they would, really have a stake in these communities, so that, when it does come time to use force, the community sees it as one of their own, using force to protect them, and not, again, sort of this outside entity that's been imposed upon them.
Well, and what where does the mentality come from that this is the direction they need to go? Is it purely financial?
Well, I mean, I think it's all. I mean, and I make the point in the book that this is not an anti-cop book; it's an anti-politician book, and I think it's bad policy. I mean, we've had a generation or two of politicians from both parties who basically the only correct position on crime is that we need to get tougher on it. And so we've had these, both parties sort of racing to see who can, look the meanest and toughest when it comes to crime, and that comes to that's not just incarceration, which is a huge problem, but also increasing, supporting increasing powers for police, making it more difficult for bad cops to get fired, making it more difficult for police to be held accountable or force them to be transparent. So I think it really goes back to bad policy, and you can take you can take good people and put them into a bad system with bad policies and bad incentives, and you're going to continue to get bad results. So I really think that people have a lot of invective and a lot of angry things to say about police officers, and in some cases I think that's understandable. But I think the appropriate place to put the blame is really with politicians, because that's really the only way that things are going to change.
It's absolutely fascinating. We're talking to Radley Balko. He's the author of the book Rise of the Warrior Cop, The Militarization of America's Police Forces. Have you heard, we've only got a few seconds left in this segment, would you mind sticking around for the next one?
Actually, I'd love to come back on again, but I'm actually on my way to give a talk somewhere.
Alrighty.
So I'd be happy to come back on, but I unfortunately can't stay.
Alrighty, folks, go ahead and pick up that book, Rise of the Warrior Cop, The Militarization of America's Police Forces. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. You can get that book on Amazon.com or at your local bookseller. And we will be back after this.
You're listening to Take Action News on We Act Radio, produced at the studios of WPWC 1480 AM in Washington, D.C., your nation's capital.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away. And after a couple of weeks, I went to my doctor.
A sore, lump, or thick patch in your mouth or throat could be a symptom of oral cancer.
My doctor told me I was smart to come in. He said that oral cancer is more common in African American men than in any other group in the U.S. It turns out I did have oral cancer, but it was caught early and my treatment was successful. I'm glad I got it checked. That probably saved my life.
If you're an African American man, you need to know about oral cancer. Visit a doctor or dentist if you see changes in your mouth that don't go away after 2 weeks. It's important to get an oral cancer exam because if you do have cancer, the earlier it's caught, the better. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
You know, this used to be a good neighborhood. Now it's a mess. You got all these polyps running around. Stick it in the devil.
Colon cancer almost always starts with the polyp. Get the polyp early and stop colon cancer before it even starts.
Where do you think you were running to, huh? I didn't even see you guys there. I don't know.
Get the test, get the polyp,
I want to talk to my lawyer!
get the cure.
I got a phone call!
CD is for everybody, not just for the few. Anyone can share VD with someone nice as you.
If you're curious or confused, get information or a pamphlet at most pharmacies or a health clinic. If you need help, see a doctor.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. More about me at karlfrisch.com. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Karl Frisch. You can also connect with the show at takeactionnews.com. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well, and we'll love to have you engage in the conversation that we're having. Joining me now is Tina Dupuy, good friend of the show and good friend of mine. Tina, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Carl, how are you?
I'm good. Have you enjoyed watching Ted Cruz and the Republican House members fighting as much as I have?
The sacrificial lamb, Ted Cruz. No, my favorite thing, this was...
I call him Canadian bacon, actually.
It's fantastic. No, my favorite thing yesterday was Representative King, who was voted to repeal, have a symbolic fake completely phony vote to repeal Obamacare 41 times now called Senator Cruz a, wait for it, phony.
Right.
I thought that.
It was absolutely funny. I saw the Congressman, Republican Real World Sean Duffy from Wisconsin on talking about how we House Republicans are just sick and tired of these senators saying that we won't do the job, so now we've done it and the ball's in their court. I mean,
Right.
It's just been fascinating to watch. And what's great is that it feels like everybody's in on it because Ted Cruz is so hated by everybody in the Republican Party at this point, at least in Washington, the House members and the senators, that when they had the opportunity, they struck.
Right. Well, they've needed to purge the kind of crazies from their party. I mean, that was part of the autopsy, was that they had to get rid of this kind of nutty Tea Party, extremists, and it looks like they're kind of trying to exercise them. And Ted Cruz would be that guy. So
well, what's crazy about it is that
to watch.
the thinking behind Boehner doing this, and he said that he wasn't going to do this, right? Is that he has to do it in order to show. Like, he has to shut down the government in order to show the Republicans in his own party who want to shut down the government that it's bad politics.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that a bit like, conquering the evils of suicide by showing people how bad it is by, killing yourself and then wanting to teach them a lesson? I mean, you're not there. You've basically crippled yourself from actually having the lesson mean anything.
Right. Well, and I mean, and historians will talk about that was the idea behind the rise of Hitler, and stop me, please. I really resent that any kind of Hitler analogy has been killed by the overuse of all Hitler analogies. But
well, no, I've gotten it cleared with Godwin.
It was like let's see what a disaster they do for the country, and then everyone will see like what a disaster Hitler is as a leader, and lo and behold, look what happened. So it was the same kind of, and the same idea is behind rhinoism, where it's like, we're just going to have like the most disastrous, horrible people that we can, and we're going to kind of sabotage from the inside, and then once you see these people in power, then it's going to change the party from that way, and sometimes that is very effective, and sometimes it is, a complete disaster.
Well, and
but I also think that I don't believe that Boehner is that effective. I also think that he's not that strategic, and I also
no. I think he's probably when he was doing far less, when he was capable of doing far more, he cried a lot more publicly. I can only imagine how wet his pillow is.
That's actually a very good point.
So you've got a good column
when
up.
When he's beaten down, he cries a lot less in public. That's a fascinating tick of his.
He's probably into some pretty freaky S&M. That's for sure. He's leaving red stains and a lot of black leather harnesses. I cannot believe I just said that.
Wow, that got really dark.
It got really particular. It got really specific in a very dark orange way. So you've got a good column up. People can visit your newly redesigned website, tinadupuy.com. Congresspeople unwilling to work shall not eat. I like this turn for you, Congress shaming as opposed to poor shaming.
Absolutely. Congress shaming kind of implies that they have shame.
Right.
And they don't. They kind of like, here's a Congress that in the, this is the worst time for, working Americans since the Great Depression. You have 46 million Americans who are impoverished. There are 35 million Canadians in this world. There are 46 million Americans who live under the poverty level. That's making less than...
And every single one of those Canadians makes sure we know about that, too. Figure they're better than us.
Exactly. So,
well, and you asked that question, right? In your column, you say, are we a nation with a food shortage? No. Are we a nation full of hungry people? Yes. How do we get to that point?
So, it's strangely by Congress. It's by doing things like by subsidizing farmers, subsidizing very calorically dense food like sugar and wheat and all these things. We give billions and billions of dollars to farmers and some lawmakers, strangely enough, to grow this food. And then we have a bunch of people like the Walmart family, the Walsons, and Walmart investors who have incredibly low prices or incredibly low wages, and essentially sharecroppers for they're the largest private employer in the country. So they have wages that don't actually pay people enough to live on. So
well, and they actually encourage people.
Taxpayers.
They actually encourage their employees to use government assistance.
They have trainings to show people how to get government assistance.
Well, and it's not stupid, right? I mean, they've thought this through. They know that it's better to have healthy employees and nourished employees. But if there's an option for them to unload those costs on somebody else, they're going to run with it.
Carl, I have sat down and talked to people and interviewed people who are managers, a manager at Walmart who has worked at Walmart for 3 years, is a manager at Walmart who is on food stamps and buys and uses her EBT card at Walmart to buy her family food.
Well, and Walmart would say she's just lucky she's a manager. After all, she's a woman.
And Congress says she should get a better job. Well, the fact of the matter is 46 million Americans, if you break it down by the numbers, these people are not all parasites. These people are not all unemployed. These people are not all this mythological surfer.
A lot of them are Republican.
That want to work. And yes, and by the numbers, they are also Republicans. And by the numbers, they are not all disabled.
And by the numbers, they're more likely to live in a red state.
And by the numbers, some of them are also children. So a lot of these people are working. In fact, if you go onto the SNAP website, 65% of these people are working. 65% of them are what now we used to call the working poor. Now they should be known as the working impoverished. So what happens is we have the working impoverished, Walmart sharecroppers, people who work for a living, working 2 jobs. McDonald's did the wonderful, generous thing of coming out with a website that can actually show their workers how to budget, because it's not that they don't pay their workers enough. It's that the people who work for minimum wage just don't know how to budget enough, right?
Right.
So they have their budget that came out, and it's not that you can work 40 hours a week. It's that you need to have 40 hours a week plus another job in order to pay $20 a month for health insurance. Now, I don't know about you, Carl, but I have health insurance, and I need $30 just to see a doctor. So it had this completely unrealistic budget that it had out. One of which was that it needed 2 jobs, and that's if you don't have child care.
Well, and the cost of insurance and the not needing heat.
I think there was no heating, so it was like you had to live in Florida, and then of course you couldn't cool your house down. And then rent was something ridiculous like $500 a month. So McDonald's comes out with this completely unrealistic budget, and you have people are starting to see that it's not that people are lazy, it's that corporations are getting subsidized by the government. That's the bottom line.
Well, and it's hand in hand together that they're treating their employees this way because they know they can get away with it, and they're going to get taken care of on the other end.
So, right, and so in the middle of all of this, and there were 2 things that happened this week. We found out that that poverty has not moved in 6 years, that it has gotten way worse in the last 30 years, that trickle-down economics was a myth. It has not helped, that Americans have actually gotten poorer, that we've had a lost decade when it's come to the middle class, that wages have flattened, and that poverty has not moved in 6 years, and that Americans are struggling, that the economy has only improved for the 1% of Americans. The wealthier have gotten wealthier in the last 6 years. That's what came out from the Census Bureau this week. That's what happened on Tuesday. On Thursday, House Republicans voted to gut food stamps.
Well, in fairness, they didn't vote just to gut food stamps. They made a vote to gut food stamps and make it harder for people that are already working to get food stamps. I mean, essentially what they've said is that you have to work 20 some odd hours a week at a government work center in order to qualify. And if you do the math on how much they're getting in benefits versus the number of hours that they're being asked to give to the government to qualify, it comes out to like $2 an hour.
Right. It's less than minimum wage, and it's also
way less than minimum
only
wage.
3 months.
Right.
So it's less. It's basically slave labor, and it's temporary.
Right. And
so it's cynical, it's unethical, and I believe illegal under the minimum wage law.
Well, I mean, if it was actually a wage, it would be illegal. But since it's a benefit, they'd probably be able to skate around it. Thankfully, there's this thing called a Democratic Senate. Tina, can you stick around and chat with me after this break?
For you, anything, Carl.
For me, anything. Okay. When we get back, Tina will be giving me her bank accounts, and we'll continue this conversation. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we'll be right back.
Say you want to go to college. Yay! A Big Ten college. But you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course. Indiana University East.
Go Red Wolves!
Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu. or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
I had a sore in my mouth that just wouldn't go away.
Education beyond high school. A path to opportunity and success for our young people. And the key to building a better life for themselves and ultimately their own children. But for many, all this is only a dream. Because the challenge of paying for education beyond high school seems to put this opportunity out of reach. But there is an organization that can help. Each year we award $80 billion in grants, low-interest loans, and work-study to students in colleges, trade schools, and professional schools. We are Federal Student Aid, part of the U.S. Department of Education. You can learn more by logging on to federalstudentaid.ed.gov. We may be able to help you realize your dreams, so don't get left behind. After all, the most costly education is the one not begun. Federal Student Aid. Start here, go further.
Take Action News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on healthcare while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
When you go on a road trip, you're careful. You follow the signs to arrive at the right place. It's the same online. Read the internet signs along the way, or you may be led astray. For example, look for the .gov at the end of the web address. If it isn't .gov, it isn't the real Social Security website. People are often victimized by misleading advertisers who use terms like Social Security or Medicare to trick the public. These companies charge a fee for free Social Security services. These services include changing your name and getting a new Social Security card. There's no need to pay for services Social Security offers for free. Go to www.socialsecurity.gov. And remember, if it isn't .gov, it isn't Social Security.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. All afternoon, we're chatting with Tina Dupuis. She is the syndicated columnist and editor-in-chief of thecontributor.com. Tina, thanks for sticking around. Tina, are you still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I sure can. So we've established that Republicans have no empathy for people.
And also just tone deaf, by the way.
Well, we've known that. I mean, I saw Tom DeLay on Dancing with the Stars. My question is, when you look at this stuff, do they have any comprehension of how it makes them look to independent-minded people?
You know, I think that they're kind of doubling down. I think that, like, they have decided that, you know, and Bill Maher, I saw do a bit about this, where, you know, Republicans think that if 10% of Americans are for something, you know, they could make it into 30, you know, and then it'll be a majority. You know, I mean, they think that, like, they think that they're winning. And in fact, I'm not even joking. Rand Paul this week said that, you know, that's what he feels like when Charlie Sheen said that they were winning. That's what he feels like, only he's not on drugs. I mean, this was...
Oh, I'm pretty sure he's on drugs. Very heavy medication.
This is a real thing that Rand Paul said, and I was like, yeah, well, when winning was like a catchphrase, people were using it sarcastically for being a loser. But okay, Rand, you're winning. Yeah, it's, you know, this is the least effective Congress in the history of Congress.
Well, the history of keeping track of these things.
Right. I mean, they're called lawmakers now in name only. They don't make laws anymore whatsoever. They kind of just do these symbolic.
I'm pretty sure they'll get back to lawmaking when they voted 42 times to get rid of Obamacare.
Right. They basically do symbolic votes to outlaw abortion and to ban Obamacare under the guise of I guess smaller government. But they no longer actually make laws. They no longer actually do anything for the American people. And you know, and again, it's at a time when working Americans are actually struggling. There are people who actually need their government to function. I mean, we still do have a D grade on our infrastructure. I mean, I live in New York. I mean, we just had Hurricane Sandy less than a year ago, and we are having more extreme weather conditions. You know, Colorado right now is having extreme weather phenomenon. We are a nation that there was one point when we led the nation in technology and infrastructure. No longer is that the case, and you know, our credit was downgraded because of these hissing cockroaches on Capitol Hill, and still they have absolutely no contrition, and it looks like no sense of changing that.
Well, and this is what happens when we elect people who don't want to, you know, who don't believe in government's ability to do anything anyways.
Right. I mean, and I think that, well, like, then you have, like, I think a perfect example of that was John McCain getting caught by, I think it was someone from BuzzFeed, got a screen grab or got a picture of him
playing poker on his phone.
Poker during the Syrian hearings, Senate hearings on Syria. He was playing poker, and he made a joke of it. He's like, "Look, I lost like $10,000," and it was like, "Okay, of course you're a gambler, you know, and you're a bad gambler. You're in the Senate."
Yeah, I when I heard that had happened, my first thought was, imagine how he would have felt if the senators of his time, when he was a POW, were not paying attention during Vietnam hearings and were instead playing, a game of blackjack.
Right, but remember his campaign, his presidential campaign? It was like every single, everything he did was like a gamble. Every single thing he did was.
Well, and the slogan, if I recall, was "The American President Americans have been waiting for."
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the American president who is, he'll be president, but he's really interested in poker.
Right. I mean, everything was a double down of a last desperate attempt to maybe this will win, and it was like, okay, this guy needs to be cut off.
Right.
For his own good.
He even got a cocktail waitress from Alaska to come around and bring free drinks to people to keep them gambling. But I digress. What do you think the next step is here? I mean, it was fascinating to watch the Republicans having their giant little rally on Capitol Hill after they voted these, this way. Basically shoring up the opportunity for Democrats to cut commercials with this images of Republicans cheering that they're about to shut down the government.
Yeah, what happened after Fonzie jumped the shark?
Right.
It kind of it wasn't... and
limped along for a few more seasons.
It didn't get canceled the next day, right? But it fizzled along for another season and a half? Happy Days. I don't really.
I have not kept up on my Happy Days trivia.
There you go. So we have another season by this analogy of them kind of
limping along,
like they're, to use Rand Paul's analogy, winning.
Oh, and what's the Canadian converse of winning for Ted Cruz?
I think that he's the proverbial sacrificial lamb. I think that they this is not how you become the president of the United States. They are taking him out and taking him out early. They are not grooming him to be a candidate. They are, they're kneecapping him, 3 years before the election. So, this is, how we say in New York, this is not a coronation. This is his funeral.
Well, and I have a feeling even his own funeral, we'll end up having a weekend at Bernie's with him. I don't think it's going to keep him from running. I think it'll only, encourage him to. I don't see it. I think that he's going to be, more of a... He better run. Character. He better run, Tina. And speaking of running, we have to go. We'll have to leave it there. Tina Dupuy, the editor-in-chief of thecontributor.com. Thanks for joining us. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we'll be back in the next hour. Stick around.
Thank you, Karl.
Thank you, Tina.
I'm Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM, broadcasting live from Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue in D.C.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
There is a new front in the war on America's middle class, and it is happening at the University of California today.
AFSCME 3299's Todd Stenhouse, the University of California, is imposing retirement cuts on 22,000 workers that will cost more than $1 billion in increased health insurance premiums when they retire. Stenhouse says this is happening while the university is fiercely defending golden parachute-style retirement plans for executives, while cutting retiree health care for workers who average $35,000 to $55,000 a year.
UC is been hell-bent and focused on protecting the most outrageous and unsustainable executive pension system, frankly, of any public employee I've ever heard of. There are over 2,000 UC pensioners who are making between $100,000 and $300,000 a year in terms of payouts. And that money is being subsidized by cuts to the system's lowest wage workers, by skyrocketing tuition, by cutting corners on patient care. And it's wrong. It is fundamentally wrong.
AFSCME 3299 is vowing to fight hard against these imposed retiree health care cuts. The Dodd-Frank wage gap rule finally passes through the SEC. Jesse Russell reports.
A controversial rule came out of the Securities and Exchange Commission Wednesday that would require public companies to reveal the wage gap between CEOs and employees. While CEO compensation is already public information, the rule would take it the additional step of requiring companies to calculate the median employee wage. According to SEC Chair Mary Jo White, companies will have flexibility on how they calculate that median wage. According to information gathered by Salary.com, on average, CEOs of the S&P 500 companies received $12.3 million in compensation for 2012. According to data compiled by the AFL-CIO, that's 354 times the average wages of workers for 2012. The rule came out of the Dodd-Frank financial reform in 2010, and since that time has lingered as the SEC fine-tuned it. The rule passed by a 3-2 vote.
On the 5-year anniversary of the Keystone XL pipeline application permit, Sean McGarvey, president of North America's building trade unions, says that the project has been under review now for more than twice as long as it would take to build the pipeline. The building trades unions say there will be no significant impacts to most natural resources on the pipeline route. The unions say the economic benefit of building the pipeline is clear, as thousands of jobs will be created. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Over 13 million people are affected by famine, war, and drought in the Horn of Africa. Unfortunately, just listening to this commercial won't help them. Just listening won't give them their next meal, or shelter, or hope. You can help by texting GIVE to 777-444 to donate $10, and by going to usaid.gov/FWD to forward the facts. Brought to you by the Ad Council and USAID. Text donations go directly to Consortium of Humanitarian Relief Organizations. Standard text and data rates apply.
As the people of Colorado are presently learning, it's horrendous enough to suffer the ravages of a natural disaster, but it's doubly horrific to then be faced with a more devastating unnatural disaster. First came the epic floods that recently ripped through the Front Range, tearing up towns, roads, waterways, mountain homes and businesses, farms and lives. Just awful. But now comes the added horror of unknown levels of poisonous contaminants pouring out of many of the thousands of fracking sites that pock this area. Big oil frackers were already notorious in Boulder and Weld counties for the environmental, health, and economic damage being done by this ravaging method of forcing gas out of rock deep under Earth's surface. Now, though, the corporate wells, tanks, ponds, and all the other parts of their fracking infrastructure have been swamped by a tsunami of floodwater and destructive debris. Even in the chaos of people scrambling to get out of the flood's way and to secure their property, many residents were so alarmed by seeing this mess of flooded wells, overturned tanks of highly toxic chemicals and wastewater, and ruptured lines that they paused to take pictures and videos. They then posted these on websites and Facebook pages to document this unexpected threat of widespread long-term damage from fracking contaminants and to alert neighbors to the danger. This is Jim Hightower saying, after all, the frackers themselves were not telling the public about this unfolding disaster. The big media outlets were curiously incurious about it, and regulators were also silent. So, like the pamphleteers of old, the people formed their own network of communication, and they've now turned it into a citizens' action network. To see some of their photos, videos, and actions, go to www.facebook.com/East Boulder County United.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
American citizens everywhere are demanding and supporting speedy and complete action.
Broadcasting from the We Act Radio studios in Washington, D.C., heard live across the nation, this is Take Action News with David Shuster.
Many of the world's great movements of thought and action have flowed from the work of a single man.
There is work to be done. The state of our economy calls for action, bold and swift, and we will act.
We will take action when action is required.
Hello and welcome back. This is Hour 2 of Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. More about me at karlfrisch.com. Sign up for my email list. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all the other social medias you can possibly imagine at Karl Frisch, KarlFrisch. Connect with the show. Don't forget to do that. TakeActionNews.com. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. I don't know if you know this, but it is the second anniversary of the Occupy movement. And a lot of people are wondering where the movement is. We're having conversations about Republicans cutting food stamps or trying to cut food stamps, wanting to shut down the government. And we could use a little public consciousness these days. Nathan Schneider is the author of Thank You, Anarchy, Notes from the Occupy Apocalypse. He's written this great book. It's a compelling study of the spirit that drove the watershed movement. It documents how Occupy, the experience, opened new social and political possibilities and registered a chilling indictment on the status quo. It was the movement's most radical impulses, this account shows, that shook millions out of failed tedium and into imagining and fighting for a better kind of future. Nathan, thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, where is everybody? What happened?
Well, people are all over the place. You know, I in the book, I talk about Occupy as an apocalypse, which might be a kind of funny word to use for a political movement, but in Greek, that word just means unveiling. And I think that is really true about what happened to us, both as a society in terms of unveiling the wrongness and corruption of our political system and the depths of economic injustice. But it's also an unveiling for a lot of thousands and thousands of people, a new generation of activists who are activated through this movement, who can't go back to the way their lives were before, and who are committed to working for change and empowered in doing so. And you see people all over the place in campaigns all across the country, whether or not they're calling themselves Occupy or not.
Well, and when you say campaigns, do you mean campaigns for public office, campaigns around social issues? What do you mean?
Good question. Rarely around public office, though office holders and candidates are using the impact of Occupy to make their way to victory, like Bill de Blasio in New York City, who will probably be our next mayor. But what I'm really talking about are...
But is de Blasio really an example of the Occupy movement? His stump speech was vintage Democratic base stump speech. It certainly was an existent form of talking points before Occupy, maybe even decades before Occupy?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, his
wanting to tax the rich to pay for things that are needed by the people. I mean, that was the message that Obama used in 2008 before Occupy. It was the message that John Kerry used some in 2004, certainly used by President Clinton in 1992. I mean, it's how much credit can Occupy really get for that?
Well, I think there are a couple of ways in which, for one thing, this is New York City. This is Bloomberg's New York City, a city that has continually reelected a 1% Wall Street grounded mayor who has used his media machine to great effect to roll over that kind of rhetoric and to make New York City, a kind of different situation rhetorically. De Blasio's talk about the two cities is very much grounded in this kind of recognition that Occupy instilled that we're living in different worlds. Whereas so much of the rhetoric that we've heard otherwise has been about unity, has been about kind of papering over class. But the thing that
it could also be said that it's John Edwards' message from 2004.
The thing that I think is really crucial is the role of race here.
Yeah.
And I think Occupy played a really important role in this. And often we tend to think about Occupy as kind of as focused on financial issues. But in New York City in particular, and I think in other places, over the course of the movement, a racial justice framework started to take hold. And I think for especially a lot of white people in the city, Occupy was a huge eye-opener and made them aware of the widespread stop-and-frisk policy being enacted by the New York Police Department. Many people who aren't people of color who weren't being affected by this policy just simply weren't aware of it until Occupy put it on the radar. And it was that, the big switch for de Blasio was when he brought up the racial diversity of his family and the way in which he is implicated by this policy.
Well, and I would certainly say that...
And he made a gamble, just really quick, he made a gamble that his white base wouldn't turn against him for bringing up race. And I think Occupy was really key in New York for laying the groundwork for that.
I think that's completely plausible, that we probably wouldn't have had really what amounted to a nationwide conversation about stop and frisk had it not been for folks in Occupy bringing that up. But even the notion of and I'm not meaning to badger this point, but even the notion of the two cities. I mean, I remember John Edwards' Two Americas. So I guess my question is, it's obviously impossible to show direct causation, right? You can't just say, same with the Tea Party, by the way. You can't say, well, the Tea Party did a good job because X led to Y, because there's no real way to prove that X led to Y. Same thing with Occupy. Do you see, if it is having an impact electorally, do you see Occupy activists taking the organizing techniques that they learned in the movement to electoral politics in the slightest, or is it around these issues like stop and frisk and other things that they're being activated into? And how do they feel that you've got candidates now picking up these issues and moving forward with them?
Yeah, great question. Much more the latter. I mean, there's very little energy, for instance, in New York City among Occupy Wall Street, key Occupy Wall Street organizers around Bill de Blasio's campaign. I think there's a sense of appreciation that the city so dramatically rallied behind that rhetoric in a way that hasn't always happened in the past when Democratic candidates have used that rhetoric. It was just dramatic how Bill de Blasio swept from third place or worse to a very, very clear victory. But by and large, people involved deeply in the Occupy movement are very suspicious of electoral politics. They recognize that even right in the case of Bill de Blasio right now that the Democratic machine is behind him, it's not at all clear that he's going to make good on any kind of
Sure. And even the promise of, at least financially, taxing the wealthier to pay for pre-K for everybody, that's only 2% of the budget. So something more has to be done there. Let's talk about that suspicion. Is it an honest suspicion born out of distrust for politicians, or is it not wanting to be responsible for the change they seek? Because ultimately, it's a lot easier to talk about issues and the need for change without ever actually getting there than being in a position where you're fighting for people who can make change happen. We can talk about stop and frisk all we want, but until somebody in power makes a change, stop and frisk would have been the law of the land.
Right, and I think it's actually neither. It's not simply a distrust of politicians, like, oh, they're all jerks, and it's not simply, a laziness. It's a systemic recognition. It's a recognition that the politics that are being offered to us from the political parties, because of their saturation with corporate money, are just inadequate, and they're not.
But it's right, and that's, I guess, what a lot of people that were outside the movement never understood. Okay, so they're inadequate. Well, what's being done to change it other than talk?
Well, that's where we get into the campaigns, that so many of these.
But the campaigns are geared towards
coming out of the movements are working on. We were just talking about fracking on this show. Fracking is something where occupiers have spread out around the country, are doing direct action, leading many of those campaigns, also doing deep community organizing beyond just the kind of performative work of the occupations. They're on many, many issues now, diving into communities and trying to figure out how to build grassroots power, and that's real politics.
No, I'm not saying it's not, but it is reliant on building enough power to effectively move politicians.
Sure, at some level that's part of the process, and people recognize it, and and that's a recognition that's borne out. Whether you're, a lot of people in this movement identify as anarchists. A lot of people, really don't necessarily feel as warmly about the Constitution and about American patriotism as many others, working in political work in the United States in past generations have. They see themselves as global citizens, and when they see themselves as part of a global movement, American politicians are part of the solution and part of the path to change. But they also see a much bigger picture where there are global forces, multinational corporations that are wielding power against these politicians and forcing these politicians into certain positions, and that's why it's so important for so many people in the Occupy movement to unite with other movements taking place in Brazil, in Turkey, and Egypt, and so forth, and build bonds of solidarity that allow them to confront these issues together. One example of that is the Robin Hood tax that there was a big march for, supported by the Nurses Union here in New York on the anniversary of Occupy. That's something that is being tackled by European movements with a lot of success. And it can only be done on a global level because it's a tax on a global market, and you can't just focus on Democrats and Republicans when you're talking about that. You have to see a bigger picture as well.
Sure. If you're just joining us, we're talking to Nathan Schneider. He's the author of the book "Thank You, Anarchy: Notes from the Occupy Apocalypse." Nathan, can you stick around? I'd like to get into what your book does a little bit. How this movement came to be in the first place. For those of us that have been educated largely by Newsroom. I'm just kidding. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we'll be back with more from Nathan Schneider on this, the second anniversary of the Occupy movement. Stick around.
Our children are exposed to violence every day, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, even in their own homes. Exposure to violence can have a devastating and lifelong impact. Through community action and leadership at the national level, we're identifying the children who need our help. I'm Attorney General Eric Holder, and I'm asking those of you who have a role in a child's life to take action. Through your attention and early intervention, we can help children in need to heal, to thrive. Together, we can change their lives and their futures.
Join the Justice Department in defending childhood.
100% success rate in modifying free consultations at 2%.
Does this sound familiar? If you're in need of assistance with your mortgage, be careful where you turn for help. Loan modification scammers will offer deals too good to be true. Learn the signs so your life won't be turned upside down. Know it, avoid it, report it. For more information or to report a scam, call 1-888-9950 or visit HUD.gov/prevent-loan-scams.
As a National Guard or Reserve member, you served your country. Now let VA serve you.
I wouldn't be here today as a successful woman without the help that I received.
Your VA honors your service by providing a wide range of veterans benefits. From home loans to job training, VA benefits can help with some of life's toughest challenges.
What's important about VA benefits is they don't just touch you as an individual. They can touch your parents, maybe your grandparents, your child.
Go to benefits.va.gov/guardreserve to learn more, including how to apply online using e-benefits.
I just finished a master's degree recently, and now I'm working on another degree as well. So the military made that all possible. My veterans benefits made that all possible.
No matter what the time is, apply for your benefits. You earn them. VA is waiting to help you.
Achieve your next mission. Learn about and apply for your VA benefits today.
Friends, David Shuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the ARC. The ARC is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The ARC is also home to the ARC Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the ARC, so stop by and see them. The ARC, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the ARC's website, www.thearcdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The ARC, part of Southeast D.C. We Act Radio is a very proud partner of the Start at Westminster, a harm reduction, prevention, and awareness initiative sponsored by the Westminster Presbyterian Church right here in D.C. START stands for Syringe, Treatment, Advocacy, Resources, Training. These are the core elements of the harm reduction philosophy at START. The goal of this program is to reduce transmissions of HIV, hepatitis, and other bloodborne infectious diseases by empowering those at risk of infection with the tools, resources, and referrals they need to take charge of their health. Over the past year, the Start at Westminster tested over 1,600 people, and they're averaging about 150 tests each month. And of course, with the proper funding, that number could go even higher. For more information on this terrific program, go to www.startatwestminster.org. Or visit the Westminster Presbyterian Church, 400 I Street Southwest, right here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. If you're just joining us, we are talking about the second anniversary of the Occupy movement with author Nathan Schneider. He wrote the book Thank You, Anarchy, and we're pleased to bring him back. Nathan, thanks for sticking around.
Absolutely.
So before we left, we were chatting a little bit about where we are now. How did we get to where we are now? I mean, what are the origins of the Occupy movement?
Well, it began just with a call that was made by the magazine Adbusters in July of 2011. This was in the wake of the uprising at Tahrir Square and in Wisconsin. Something was in the air at that time for an American autumn, right? And the group of people who responded to that call, who got energized, mostly young people, who found it on the internet, started meeting in New York City. I first encountered them at Tompkins Square Park about a month before the occupation began. And at that point, they were already starting to tinker with the idea. Adbusters had called for just an occupation at Wall Street, and they asked in their call, what is our one demand? But then Adbusters didn't do any organizing, so it was up to these folks to figure out what to do next. And they changed the idea a little bit. They came to feel like they weren't in a position to make one demand yet. What they wanted instead was to see a movement rise up, one that would inspire and empower other people all over the place to rise up in their communities and organize with one another and to discuss and decide what their demands were. And that's what happened.
Well, and then the confusion happened, right, where people looking in saw it and thought, okay, there's no rules, there's no leaders, there's no set determined list of objectives because it's free-flowing, and everybody's opinion holds the same weight. How did the movement handle that kind of not criticism necessarily, but confusion?
Yeah, well, I think there were that was a confusion that sometimes was in the movement as well. But I think we have to confront this in terms of history. As this was happening, as this national debate was happening about what are their demands, right? Where are their leaders? Just remember the civil rights movement had Martin Luther King and so forth. At the time, I was talking with a columnist who works with a website I edit, wagingnonviolence.org, Mary Elizabeth King. She was a leading member of SNCC during the civil rights movement, very, very active, and since became a scholar of resistance movements. And for her, this was totally normal. This is how these things begin. They begin in these moments of energy and charisma and excitement and kind of anarchy. And then over time, over the course of years, they crystallize through deeper forms of organizing. So I think in a lot of ways that confusion was caused by the amnesia that our society puts on our social movements to tell people that they have no history of social movements, or to distort that history, and to keep people waiting for answers to come from politicians.
Well, and so now we're 2 years in. I was making reference to the fact that Newsroom had a little storyline concerning Occupy this time around.
Yeah, I actually saw myself portrayed in that. It was shocking. I turned it on and was watching, and then all of a sudden I was like, "Oh, that's me." They seem to have drawn the scene from my article in Harper's Magazine.
Which it must be thrilling, but at a certain point, I look at it, and I remember during 2004 when Howard Dean was running for president, and I was working on the campaign. We were effectively using the blogosphere to drive volunteers and donations and whatnot. And there was a scene in The West Wing during the campaign where Santos was running to take over the presidency from Martin Sheen, in which Santos walks in and they're like, "We have a blogger we'd like you to meet. This is Duncan. He's a blogger." And the implication was, it was so insidery and so not dismissive, but so just top line, right? They couldn't get too deep into why the significance of a blogger was, or what role these folks played in any given campaign, but they knew they had to include them. At a certain point, I look at movements like Code Pink, for example, and at a certain point there is a level of feel-good activism versus effective activism. And so when the war in Iraq was popular with, like, let's say 45% of the American people in its heyday, and Code Pink was making lots of headlines, etc., eventually you get to a point where the war is popular with like 20% of the American people, which is basically just the same 20% of crazy people who liked George Bush in 2006. And at a certain point, you're no longer bringing people on board. You're now keeping people away because, they look at that and they think, I'm not somebody who would ever do that. I would never do that. I know lots of liberal people who would probably be kismet with the issues that Occupy was trumpeting. But the idea of sitting in a powwow or whatever they're called with a couple hundred people where there was nobody leading, and like just all the seemingly weird for people that were not in the midst of it, activities that didn't seem to result in much change directly, would keep them away. How do movements like Occupy grow to incorporate more pragmatic progressives?
Well, I think by doing the kinds of things that a lot of people who came out of Occupy are doing now. One can look, for instance, at Occupy Sandy. That was a tremendous watershed after Hurricane Sandy swept through the city. Occupiers got out of their park, got out of their protest mode and went into communities and started asking questions rather than shouting protests.
Well, and not just asking questions, but helping a lot of people too. I think that needs to be
stressed. About what people need and figuring out ways to actually meet people.
Nathan,
Yep.
we don't have time for an example. I apologize. We're going to have to cut it there. We're coming up on a hard break. This is Nathan Schreider. Pick up his book, Thank You, Anarchy. Go to your local bookseller, Amazon, whatever. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we will be right back.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
If you're planning to replace your Social Security card simply because you don't have it, you may not need to replace it at all. What's most important is that you remember your Social Security number. Remember during school how you memorized information and answers for tests? In the same way, you should memorize your Social Security number. Knowing your number is important, but having the card may not be. If you really do need to get a replacement card to show to an employer, it's easy to apply for a new one. Find out how at www.socialsecurity.gov/SS number.
Say you want to go to college. Yay! A Big Ten college. But you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course. Indiana University East. Go Red Wolves! Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
Take Action News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on health care while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
Hello, my name is Jim Gray, and I am a judge of the Superior Court in California and a former federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I would like to talk to you for a moment about marijuana. Did you know that since the federal government first banned marijuana in 1937, usage in this country has actually gone up by about 4,000%? Or did you know that in the Netherlands, where adults are allowed to possess small amounts of marijuana and buy it from government-regulated businesses, fewer adults and fewer teenagers smoke marijuana than here in our country? Or that an American is arrested on marijuana charges every 38 seconds? If you are wondering if any of this makes sense, you are not alone. To find out more, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thank you, and good luck to us all.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. We've talked before on the show about issues important to the LGBT community other than marriage equality. Although marriage equality is a giant issue, a lot of our heterosexual friends and family have no idea that gay and lesbian people can be fired in 30 some odd states just for who they love. They can be denied housing and all sorts of other things, and that it's even worse for our trans brothers and sisters. Joining me to talk about a specific case involving trans workplace discrimination, in which a trans worker won $50,000 for workplace bias, is our good friend Alona Turner. She's the legal director at the Transgender Law Center. Alona, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, tell us about this case.
Well, we were really thrilled to see the really high settlement that came out in this case, $50,000 for the transgender employee who was discriminated against. This case was filed by our colleagues at Lambda Legal. They helped this woman file an EEOC complaint after she was fired from her job at a grocery store basically immediately after coming out as transgender. She had been living as a woman pretty much full-time outside of work, but had been hiding who she was on the job. But when she finally got up the courage to tell her employer, "This is who I am. You've been seeing me as male, but I really am a woman, and it's important that I start presenting that way at work as well." Initially, they said, "Oh, that'll be fine. You don't have to worry about anything." But very shortly after she started actually coming to work presenting as female, she was unceremoniously fired, told that she was making other employees uncomfortable, and that this just wasn't going to work out for the grocery store as a business. They were concerned about basically customers and other employees being uncomfortable, and so let her go. But fortunately, she found her way to Lambda Legal's help desk, and they helped her file a complaint with the EEOC, the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the agency that investigates and prosecutes cases under all the federal employment discrimination laws. And as a result of their investigation, the EEOC concluded that this employer had in fact discriminated against her because she is transgender, which the agency held has been holding for about a year now, that discrimination against people because they are transgender is a prohibited form of sex discrimination.
And that was a big deal back in April of 2012 when the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, issued basically a comprehensive ruling that gave transgender individuals sorely needed federal protections against discrimination in the workplace. Prior to that, a case like this might not have been possible.
That's absolutely right, and we were incredibly honored to have been a part of that. The case that in which the EEOC made that ruling was Macy versus Holder, brought by my team at the Transgender Law Center on behalf of our client, Mia Macy, who had experienced actually a pretty similar set of facts to Corey McCreary in the most recent case. Mia had applied for a job at a federal agency, and they said she was a shoo-in, and she packed up her family and moved across the country, actually, in counting on this job coming through. But shortly before she was supposed to start work, she had been going through sort of legal and medical steps to transition from male to female, and they had offered her the job essentially when she was presenting as male, and then she called them to say, "Oh, by the way, I need to let you know I'll be starting work as a woman, as Mia," and they got back to her within a couple of days and said, "Oh, sorry, actually, funding for the position has been cut. There's no more job." But she later found out that, in fact, they had hired somebody else. And then, actually, the EEOC concluded its investigation just a couple months ago and found that, yes, it was completely discriminatory. The other person that they hired was far less qualified, and it was all pretextual for, they were really concerned about the fact that she was transgender, as we suspected all along.
Is there any indication of how prevalent this is? I mean, we're at the dawn of a new civil rights age where you tell most heterosexual people that LGBT people can be fired in, well more than half the states in this country, and they're shocked because our culture has moved so much more quickly than our laws have. And it's continuing to move more quickly for gay and lesbian, bisexual people, but not as quickly for trans people. How prevalent is this type of workplace discrimination for trans people?
Unfortunately, it's extremely, shockingly high, the rates of employment discrimination faced by transgender folks. Some recent studies have shown that as many as something like 94% of transgender people in a recent, really large national survey said that they had experienced some kind of mistreatment on the job simply because of who they are. And that we see that playing out in the really high unemployment rates for the trans community, which are at double the national average, and it goes up to 4 times the national average for African American transgender people. Really disproportionate rates of homelessness. As a result, people living in extreme poverty, getting involved with, being forced to get involved with the street economies because they can't get another kind of job, and then disproportionate involvement with the criminal justice system. It's really just a terrible cycle of discrimination and further marginalization.
Well, and that's why I think the EEOC's decision to classify this as a form of gender discrimination was so huge. For years we've been talking about the Employment Non-Discrimination Act in Congress, and several years ago there was an effort to remove trans protections in that legislation to make it easier or more palatable to members of Congress who might not vote for it with such protections. That was thankfully abandoned. And then this kind of leapfrog situation happened with this decision, which I think is outstanding. And you're also beginning to see, more trans visibility, whether it's in shows like Orange is the New Black or a show from the year before, which I can't remember. You had the Miss Universe pageant contestant. And now I read this really, heart-touching story from the newspaper about a California high school student who was elected homecoming queen, a transgender teenage girl.
Right.
These are the same types of stories that you read in the late 90s, early 2000s about LGBT people, where it was becoming more and more evident that a generation of people coming up the ranks of society did not have a problem with any of this.
It's true. I think that in a lot of ways, the transgender rights movement is about 20 or so years behind where the lesbian and gay rights movement is in terms of, acceptance from the broader society and legal rights. But we are seeing really stunning advancements in recent years, and especially as you mentioned, sort of leapfrogging. It is interesting and strikes some people as, ironic, certainly unusual that in the realm of employment protections, it is the case now, thanks to the EEOC ruling and a number of federal court rulings over the last 10 years, that it is very, very well clearly established that transgender folks are protected under federal employment discrimination laws, the laws like Title VII that prohibit sex discrimination on the job. But those same laws have not been so clearly extended to people who are fired for being lesbian, gay, or bisexual. So we certainly do still need ENDA both to firm things up and make it absolutely crystal clear.
Well, we need this to stick in a new administration, too.
Sure.
And, as we see these things move along, are there other cases working their way through the pipelines?
There are. There are a number of cases, that we're working on as we speak. I can't share too many details about those, but we have one that we're working on where a transgender woman who works in a restaurant was offered a promotion, but said that in order to accept that promotion, she would have to start dressing as male, even though she was hired as female. And in fact, when she first started the job, she was told that she should wear more makeup because they wanted waitresses and people working at the counter to meet a certain sort of appearance standard. But then they said in order to be a supervisor, you have to be a man and appear as a man. So
absolutely confounding sometimes when you hear about these things. Really great news, though, in this case. A great resolution there. If you're just joining us, we've been talking to our good friend from the... I've completely misplaced your organization name. Can you...
Transgender Law.
Thank you, the Transgender Law Center.
Bay Area.
That's right. And I want to thank you very much for joining us, Alana Turner. Thanks for talking with us about this important story.
Yeah, thanks for bringing some attention to it.
Absolutely. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and when we come back, we are going to talk to a man whose television ad in which he comes out to his Tea Party father. He's running for Congress. Carl Shortino will join us, and he's coming out to his father in this new ad, his Tea Party dad, but not in the way you might think. Stick around, and we'll chat with him after the break.
Education beyond high school, a path to opportunity and success for our young people, and the key to building a better life for themselves and ultimately their own children. But for many, all this is only a dream, because the challenge of paying for education beyond high school seems to put this opportunity out of reach. But there is an organization that can help. Each year we award $80 billion in grants, low-interest loans, and work-study to students in colleges, trade schools, and professional schools. We are Federal Student Aid, part of the U.S. Department of Education. You can learn more by logging on to federalstudentaid.ed.gov. We may be able to help you realize your dreams, so don't get left behind. After all, the most costly education is the one not begun. Federal Student Aid. Start here, go further.
Jeff, I'm home.
Hey, Mom.
So, what did you do today? I noticed the dishes are still in the sink.
I've been busy.
Getting your taxes done like we talked about?
Oh, I got my friend Dave on that. Hey, he's only charging $20.
Not Dave from your high school class who graduated 3 years late.
Yeah, he's good with numbers. Won our fantasy football league last year.
Jeff, I can't believe you would actually take your...
Kidding, Mom. I took all my paperwork over to that preparer just like you recommended.
Using a paid tax preparer this year? Visit irs.gov for some do's and don'ts. Like look for a preparer who has a preparer tax ID number and signs your return. Check out their qualifications and review your tax return before you sign it.
Oh, Jeff, why do you do this to me?
Mom, you're just so easy.
irs.gov. It's the best tax tip of all.
Hello everyone, I'm Daniel Marins, and I'm here to talk to you about Take Action News with David Shuster. Every week we talk politics, government, and what you can do to take action. David Shuster talks with today's leading political minds.
Valerie, so many people will know your name, know your story because of those dastardly actions by the Bush administration to try to discredit your husband, who called them out for their lies that led up to the Iraq War. And in so going after him, they leaked your name. 10 years since the start of the Iraq War. Has your perspective on any of this changed? Do you still carry around any sort of anger or frustration to the Bush administration? How have you been dealing with it all these years?
Until the right is able to come to terms with the reality that we were lied into this war and it was not a good idea and it wasn't to liberate the Iraqi people, they will just continue to live in, la-la land and perpetuate the lies that got us into the war in the first place.
Tune in from noon to 3 p.m. every Saturday, right here on We Act Radio.
When our daughter Ava was 4, we noticed she didn't talk much. A genetic test revealed that she had hearing loss caused by 2 mutated genes. One she inherited from myself, the other from her dad. If it weren't for the amazing people at U of M, we might have never known the true cause of Ava's hearing loss or how to properly treat it.
The University of Michigan C.S. Mott Children's Hospital is one of only a handful of hospitals in the world researching genetic hearing loss in addition to treating it. Our breakthrough research and advanced treatments combined with outstanding care help us change children's lives in extraordinary ways. For the leaders who invest in pediatric care, call a Mott Patient Advisor at 877-475-MOTT or visit mottchildren.org.
She is more talkative now and more social. She loves music now. She's humming to the music, and it's sweet to actually hear her humming.
To learn more, call 877-475-MOTT.
They not only helped us find answers, they helped Ava find her voice.
That's the Michigan difference.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. All afternoon, more about me at karlfrisch.com. That's KarlFrisch.com. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And if you happen to have used the internet this week, you no doubt will know about this story. It is the story of a openly gay liberal state representative from the great state of Massachusetts, Karl Shortino, who, in his first television commercial for his campaign for Congress in the open special election for Ed Markey's seat, the 5th Congressional District, decides to come out to his Tea Party father, but not in the way you might be thinking. Let's go ahead and listen to the ad now.
I'm Karl Shortino, and I'll never forget that conversation with my dad.
That's me.
Where I had to come out and tell him.
Wait for this.
That I was a Massachusetts liberal.
And he's proud of it.
Dad's in the Tea Party.
Damn right. It was bad enough him taking on the big banks and corporations in the legislature.
They weren't paying their fair share in taxes.
And he wrote the buffer zone law.
To protect women entering abortion clinics from harassment.
It's going all the way to Supreme Court. I was kind of proud of that.
But here's the one that drives him crazy.
He wants to go to Congress to take on the NRA and the Tea Party.
I won't give up on an assault weapons ban.
Or universal background checks, or banning high-capacity magazines.
There are some things you don't stop fighting for. Also the right to choose, equal pay for women, and equal rights for, well, everybody.
You've been like this for 35 years.
It's why I approve this message. And I still love you, Dad.
Me too, son.
It's so adorable. It's such a good message, too. Joining me now to talk about the ad and his campaign and the impact the ad has had on his campaign, State Representative from the great state of Massachusetts, Karl Shortino. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Karl. Thanks for having me on and for your help and getting the word out about this ad. It's really been a pleasure this week to see it take off.
Absolutely. So, you guys shoot this ad, and I have empathy because I have an extremely conservative father myself. I remember I was reading the website Gawker, which actually had a great piece about your ad in it. And I saw a story about Herman Cain, who was running for president, and it said, if you thought Herman Cain's first video was crazy, wait till you see this one. And then I click on it and I start watching it, and I'm like, oh, that looks familiar. That looks like my parents' house. And then my father appeared on the screen, and I determined that my father was in a Herman Cain video for Herman Cain's presidential campaign. So I have a Tea Party dad myself.
I'm sorry, but I don't get along with him. I get along with mine at least.
Yeah, that's right. So you guys shoot the ad. It goes on television. What's the reception been?
It's been overwhelming, really fantastic. We have over, I think, something around 310,000 hits on YouTube at last count. We've had a lot of people signing up on karlforcongress.com to volunteer and donate money. It's really taken off in the campaign, and frankly, this has been a very, very quiet congressional race until now, and all the attention has been about this ad and my progressive politics and fighting with my Tea Party father. It's a great piece in so many levels, and has really gotten a lot of people. Our office right now, I'm down the hall, it's filled with volunteers who are busy calling away, and they've all shown up and really gotten super engaged. We've had a great base of support up until now, but this week it exploded. It's just taken off in a really strong way.
Well, I've seen you all over MSNBC and CNN and every place, but I don't think anybody's asked you how you got started in politics, which is an interesting story in and of itself.
Yeah, I did not plan my life around politics. I studied biology in college. I was actually working at a community health center in the research department. I expected to go into a public health or science track in my life, but the 2003 same-sex marriage court case in Massachusetts, the Goodrich court case, galvanized a lot of people around here. I was 25 at the time. I'm openly gay. I was out then, and I went to meet with my state rep, who had been in the legislature as a Democrat for 14 years. He was a conservative Dem. I went to his office hours in the senior center in town and went as a constituent to say, please don't vote to take away my right to marriage. There was a constitutional amendment being proposed. And he was so insulting in that conversation. It wasn't just a yes or a no or a conversation. It was a you people this and you people that. Very dehumanizing moment for me as a constituent. I literally walked out of that room and felt very inspired to want to run for office. I took him on. I announced 2 months later my campaign to challenge him in the primary. I beat him in the primary that September 2004 by just 93 votes. So I was shocked. He was more shocked. He tried to do a write-in campaign to keep his feet and waged a really homophobic race, but we beat that back too and managed to pull through. I've been in the state legislature for the last 9 years ever since then.
Well, do you think you learned how to get along with people while maintaining your progressive ideals as a result of that initial exchange with this guy? I mean, somebody who would have a difference of opinion with you being so vicious and nasty.
I actually think my expectations of my meeting with my state rep were let down so much because of my relationship with my father. I mean, my father is really conservative, and we do really bicker and banter and argue about our politics all the time, but with laws and you know, with the way that we can actually respect each other at some human level, and to walk into a room where, you know, I expected to at least have some level of human respect and saw nothing of that was honestly quite jarring as a constituent. To have your state rep look at you in the face and call you people is a very jarring moment. You know, and that did teach me, frankly, a lot in the legislature about not being afraid of the tough fights, not backing down to people who have very different opinions and very different values, but doing it in a way that's respectful, that's not dehumanizing, that's not belittling of people's role and constituencies and values. You know, I fight for my values tooth and nail, and I don't do anything to lose ever. But I also respect that people have different values and are fighting for their views in a way that... Well, and I mean,
if people just fought and they were nasty, it would make it even harder to work together when there is something in common. You know, a lot of people are just getting to know who you are as a candidate. Although this campaign's been going on for a while now, and you've got the support of places like People for the American Way, Blue America PAC, Human Rights Campaign, the Victory Fund, Mass Equality, Progressive Change Campaign Committee, Congressman Alan Grayson, Keith Ellison, Rahul Grijalva, Jared Polis, Mark Takano, and on and on and on. So you're obviously one of the more progressive candidates in this race. But in a place like Massachusetts, in a primary with several other, state legislators and other elected officials, how do you distinguish yourself? What sets you apart from them in terms of progressive leadership?
Sure. Well, I am running in a crowded primary, but I am the most consistent, strong, progressive candidate in this race. I've been in the State House for 9 years. I've served with 4 of the 6 other candidates in this field. I work pretty well with some of them, frankly, but I'm also the only one that co-founded the Progressive Caucus, that works within the Progressive Caucus to really do the organizing work behind the scenes to get better progressive outcomes in legislation. I rolled up my sleeves and took on the speaker when it came to increasing the minimum wage even higher and closing corporate tax loopholes and reinvesting that money into our schools and infrastructure. I unlike most of the candidates in this race, or frankly all the candidates in this race, I do the work to get the job done as a progressive. I take on these fights, I organize, and I do think the organizing role is really important right now. When I look at what's happening in Washington, I know we're in a really bad place right now in Congress, but we need strong, bold progressives that are willing to stand up, fight for our values, and develop a strategy to win in the short term and in the long term. And frankly, I think a large part of that is knowing where your values are as progressives, having spine and backbone, as Paul Patrick says.
And fighting for it.
Fighting for it, absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. We've been chatting with Karl Shortino. He is the state representative from the great state of Massachusetts. And if you want the ad that you heard at the top of this segment to appear on television, go to his website, karlforcongress.com, and chip in some money. The people of Massachusetts can see it, and they can elect Karl on October 15th. Karl, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much, Karl. Really appreciate your help.
This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we will be right back.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but But I like talking to smart people. People who are smarter than me. Some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune in to the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 AM We Act Radio.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
Can we welcome the city of San Antonio, Texas to the 21st century? I'm attorney Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In early September, the San Antonio City Council held its vote on a proposed ordinance that would prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in the city, including in public accommodations and in making city contracts. Republican heavyweights such as Senator Ted Cruz and the Attorney General Greg Abbott, who is running for governor, blasted the proposal. The basis for the opposition? Alleged denial of religious-based beliefs of the right to discriminate. The Associated Press story on the San Antonio City Council fight quoted Dee Villarubia, a 67-year-old former Air Force officer whose landlord evicted her 2 years ago because she is gay, as saying, "When I say the Pledge of Allegiance, I say justice for some, because there has been an asterisk on that part of the pledge that means not me. Today," said the former Air Force officer, "I would take the asterisk away and now finally say justice for all." The ordinance, you see, was adopted by the City Council, 8 in favor, 3 opposed. And by passing this ordinance, San Antonio joined 180 other cities across the United States that will not permit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU.
Is anybody going to San Antonio?
Because freedom can't protect itself.
With your Working Virginia update, I'm Doug Cunningham. Republican strategist Karl Rove says the House Republican threat to shut down government in a doomed effort to defund the Affordable Care Act is an ill-conceived tactic that should be rejected. Lee Saunders, president of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, says the threat is crazy.
It's crazy what they're doing. They've taken like 20-some votes to try to defund Obamacare, and now they're trying to link it to the budget. I think that they want to try to shut government down. That just shows the lack of respect for the work that public service workers perform in Washington, D.C. and across the country. And I think that the Democrats have to be very strong, and they are being strong. Harry Reid, the leader of the Senate, is saying that won't even be considered in the Senate. That's what he should say. I think President Obama is being very strong about this. And this is a signature piece of legislation for the president, and he can't back off.
Working Virginia Update, produced by Workers Independent News. I'm Doug Cunningham.
This update made possible by the Office and Professional Employees International Union, ensuring fair treatment, fair wages, and benefits for thousands of working Virginians. Online at opeiu.org.
Packers.
Vikings. We come from different places.
Uptown.
Downtown.
We
come to different conclusions.
Half empty.
Half full.
But when we live united, we make a real difference in the building blocks of life. Children succeed in school, families gain financial stability, the health of our neighbors improves, and suddenly so do our communities. Real change won't happen without you.
Live United.
So give, advocate, volunteer, Live United. Sign up today at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
There is a new front in the war on America's middle class, and it is happening at the University of California today.
AFSCME 3299's Todd Stenhouse, the University of California, is imposing retirement cuts on 22,000 workers that will cost more than $1 billion in increased health insurance premiums when they retire. Stenhouse says this is happening while the university is fiercely defending golden parachute-style retirement plans for executives, while cutting retiree health care for workers who average $35,000 to $55,000 a year.
UC is been hell-bent and focused on protecting the most outrageous and unsustainable executive pension system, frankly, of any public employee I've ever heard of. There are over 2,000 UC pensioners who are making between $100,000 and $300,000 a year in terms of payouts. And that money is being subsidized by cuts to the system's lowest wage workers by skyrocketing tuition, by cutting corners on patient care. And it's wrong. It is fundamentally wrong.
AFSCME 3299 is vowing to fight hard against these imposed retiree health care cuts. The Dodd-Frank wage gap rule finally passes through the SEC. Jesse Russell reports.
A controversial rule came out of the Securities and Exchange Commission Wednesday that would require public companies to reveal the wage gap between CEOs and employees. While CEO compensation is already public information, the rule would take it the additional step of requiring companies to calculate the median employee wage. According to SEC Chair Mary Jo White, companies will have flexibility on how they calculate that median wage. According to information gathered by Salary.com, on average, CEOs of the S&P 500 companies received $12.3 million in compensation for 2012. According to data compiled by the AFL-CIO, that's 354 times the average wages of workers for 2012. The rule came out of the Dodd-Frank financial reform in 2010, and since that time has lingered as the SEC fine-tuned it. The rule passed by a 3-2 vote.
On the 5-year anniversary of the Keystone XL pipeline application permit, Sean McGarvey, president of North America's building trade unions, says that the project has been under review now for more than twice as long as it would take to build the pipeline. The building trades unions say there will be no significant impacts to most natural resources on the pipeline route. The unions say the economic benefit of building the pipeline is clear, as thousands of jobs will be created. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Oh, drat these computers. Have you people ever seen computers before? I hear there's rumors on the internet. Have views on the Google. I gotta get on that internet. I'm late on everything. A series of tubes. They're so naughty and so complex.
Computers are my forte. All right, welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm your host, Karl Frisch. Unfortunately, Dr. Digipol is not with us this week. Alan Rosenblatt is unavailable. He's got something to do on a Saturday afternoon. Who would have thunk it? But instead, we've got my good friend. He is a partner at DS Political, which you can find at dspolitical.com. Chris Massicott. Follow him on Twitter. That's Chris, Massicotte. Chris Massicott, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Carl.
All right, so I remember the early days of online video, and I would cut a video and then I have to upload it in like 3 download speeds so that people who were on like a really bad dial-up and people who were on a good dial-up and then people who had fancy DSL could all access it in 3 different file formats. Then came YouTube and giving people video, and now anybody can look at video on their phone, on their tablet, on their computer. But one thing that was not getting hammered out was how you could deliver this stuff. So people have been advertising online for a long, long time, but there wasn't a way, politically speaking, to say, okay, Chris, I know that you sell advertising and I want to reach only Democrats who voted in the last 3 elections online. Can you do that for me? And now you can with DS Political. Tell us how.
Right. Well, DS Political is a online advertising platform. DSP actually stands for Demand Side Platform. And the reason why it's called a demand side platform is that the consumer is actually demanding that ad based on the cookies that are on their browser. And a browser cookie is a small line of code that helps advertisers and also people who track what people are seeing on the internet do that. So we advertise to those cookies. What we did was we took about 500 million of them and matched them to the voter file that then allows us to say, well, now I want to advertise to women who vote in primary elections who are Democrats who are between the ages of 18 and 29, for example.
Well, and for people that don't quite get the cookie thing, I mean, essentially, like if I go to Google right now and search for like a Toyota Prius, and then all of a sudden, and I click on a few links or whatever, and then all of a sudden I'm, on Monday I'm back in work and I'm looking at things on the internet, and I might start seeing ads for Priuses all over the place on my phone or on my tablet or on my computer. That's essentially how cookies work, right?
That's exactly right. Or when you're ordering something online and you start to type in your name and it automatically fills in because the website already knows that you were there, that is also a cookie.
So now you've matched hundreds of millions of Americans to, their cookies to how they appear in the voter file, which basically makes it so that a campaign can directly target the voters they want to reach. How are candidates using this kind of revolution?
Well, research has shown that when a candidate is able to get themselves across in a video or sound message rather than just a piece of mail or something like that, that they have a better shot at, gaining the vote of that particular voter that they're trying to get to. And advertising on TV in a lot of congressional races is just very, very prohibitively expensive. So we've been doing, most of our business recently has been pre-roll video. So you're on MSNBC and you want to watch your clip of Rachel Maddow, or I wanted to watch a clip of our friend Carl Shortino and Hardball. I had to watch a video before that. And it was a 30-second ad. And those are the kinds of ads that we can target using cookies.
And I imagine that this is particularly helpful for nonprofit organizations that might be pushing a particular policy. If let's say that you're from People for the Grand Canyon or something, some organization probably called that, and you're fighting some bill that would, strip mine the Grand Canyon. Now this organization, rather than having to come up with the money for television, they could shoot, a video for the internet and target the legislators directly where it counts most in their own district.
Well, that's exactly right. And what they're doing is, rather than running it on television to target the legislator, if the legislator has an opinion about something, nothing is going to change their mind about that. What changes a legislator's mind is hearing from his constituents. So those folks like the Sierra Club or whomever, whatever organization, is educating that legislator's constituents about a particular issue and encouraging them to contact their legislator or doing something else to make sure that they know that this is an issue that they care about, and they're going to remember that come the next election time.
Well, I guess the days of just blanket advertising. I remember back when I was just getting started and doing some online stuff in the early 2000s, we would buy ads on like, oh, I bet there's a lot of liberals that go to the Huffington Post. Let's get some ads on the Huffington Post.
Yep.
And, probably not the most cost-effective way of reaching people. So it's interesting to see that there's been this evolution. Folks you've got a pretty great video on your website, dspolitical.com, that people can watch to get educated about how it works, and maybe it might be right for them, and they can contact you guys. How are campaigns that want to get more substantial issue-oriented messages out there? How are they doing it?
So I'm really glad you asked that. There's this really cool new thing out there called content marketing. Campaigns have this ability now that they're creating, longer videos, or they're creating, press releases and stuff. We can actually target through the cookies and actually have stories, come up to the top of these news sites. Huffington Post has been doing it for a very long time. And some of these other publications have been, getting user-generated content, but then the users are paying for it to be promoted to the people that they want to see it. And we can now use cookies for that. So if you had, like, say, a 3 or 4 minute long video on the healthcare law, for example, we can actually find people who are most likely to be interested in that article and then pay to promote that. And the only thing that's different between what would be produced by, somebody at the Huffington Post or something produced by a content marketer is that it says sponsored, in a small font.
Well, and this can be fairly controversial. How do, I've seen, for instance, the Koch brothers doing it on, BuzzFeed, for example. How would you suggest somebody avoid the controversy in something like this?
To really come up with content that they believe that people would actually care about. And I think that people running for office have positions and have issues that people actually really care about. And if they write about them or they produce a video in some substantial way, that I actually think that people will really respond to that thing. These people are really thinking about this issue, and these folks are really doing that. I don't know if to avoid the controversy, I'm just not make it look like a blatant political ad.
Well, and I guess there's a balancing act, right? Like, is the controversy going to be more severe than what you'd get out of, X number of people seeing the message you're trying to carry?
Well, that's exactly right, yeah.
So one of the things that I think is happening under the radar that isn't getting a lot of attention is the effort to get people signed up for Obamacare. There's a lot of stuff happening online and so little happening on television, at least where I live. I can't speak for the states where it's going to be more difficult to get people signed up, but I see very little in terms of television. I see a lot in terms of the internet.
Yeah, so from what I understand, most of the exchanges have not started to advertise in earnest yet. But come October 1st, how to explain it? The states that are expanding Medicaid are getting a certain amount of money from the Health and Human Services Department to promote their exchange. Those states that are not expanding Medicare are getting nothing. The federal government does not have a budget to do this. So there's these outside groups like Enroll America, Planned Parenthood, all of these outside groups that need to communicate to folks to sign up for the federal exchange. They all have their own agendas to do it, and they're doing it in three major ways. The first one is going door to door in a field program and targeting people based on how likely they are to not have health insurance and be eligible for the first round. And the second way is through online advertising. And we've created a model along with our friends at Catalyst to determine who is most likely to be uninsured. And so depending on a group's budget, they can decide how likely how much of the population they want to target and then go after them. And then there's lots of other ways that they can go and get more information when they click on the ad, or they can click to call somebody. Health insurance is a really important thing, and people don't want to just sign up for it online like they do car insurance, believe it or not. It's been shown in polls. So they're trying to drive as many people as possible to call their exchanges and to get them signed up, because the success of this particular law, success of Obamacare is going to be how many people sign up. And we have an obligation, I think, as progressives and also as American citizens to make sure that it does in fact succeed.
Well, and to that point, is it easier for them to reach people through the internet than through television, given that people are now skipping ads because of DVRs and everything?
It's certainly less expensive, and it's certainly...
which means you could reach more people if it's less expensive.
You can reach more people, and you also have them at the point where they're holding a device that can communicate back. On television, like how many,
I've tried many times to pick up my television and use it as a phone. It does not work. The world's largest iPhone.
That new fancy television that you have, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if you could.
So you're right. I mean, you do have, in the palm of your hand something that once you've been connected because of some advertisement, you can just press a button and it'll connect you.
Exactly. And we're trying to drive as many people to these informational navigator sites as possible for the as efficiently as possible, so that we don't waste the money that our clients have been given to do this, because we have to be successful. We have to get lots and lots of people who are eligible to sign up as early as possible.
Well, and it's that time of the year when that's going to be happening. I'm sure everybody listening at home is going to be experiencing a deluge of advertisements on the internet, on television, on the radio, everywhere. Christopher Mascott, a partner at DS Political. You can find them at dspolitical.com. Thanks for joining me.
Great. Thanks, Carl.
Alrighty, this is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about food stamps with one of our favorites, a reporter from In These Times. Stick around.
Sergeant Michelle Garcia served meritoriously in Iraq and has the medals to prove it. Soon after leaving the Navy, Lieutenant Chris Scott found a job, a home, and started a family of his own. Corpsman Richard Stokely took the skills he learned in Vietnam and put them to good use as a paramedic. But soon after leaving the military, each of these veterans fell on hard times and faced homelessness. Even after Michelle lost all her savings, even after Chris wasn't able to pay his mortgage, And even after Richard battled alcoholism for years, they each reached out for help when they needed it most. A simple phone call put them in touch with a trained professional from the Department of Veterans Affairs. That call got Michelle a place to stay until she could afford one of her own, put Chris in touch with employment assistance, and found Richard a substance abuse program. These veterans are success stories not only for how they were able to help others while serving their country, but for how they were able to let others help them. If you know of or are a veteran in need, make the call.
When you go on a road trip, you're careful. You follow the signs to arrive at the right place. It's the same online. Read the internet signs along the way, or you may be led astray. For example, look for the .gov at the end of the web address. If it isn't .gov, it isn't the real Social Security website. People are often victimized by misleading advertisers who use terms like Social Security or Medicare to trick the public. These companies charge a fee for free Social Security services. These services include changing your name and getting a new Social Security card. There's no need to pay for services Social Security offers for free. Go to www.socialsecurity.gov. And remember, if it isn't .gov, it isn't Social Security.
Would you like to secure stable employment, affordable, high-quality child care, or an opportunity to serve your community through meaningful volunteer and internship experiences? If so, UPO is the place for you. Hello, I'm Andrea Thomas, Vice President of Administration and Chief of Staff for UPO. As the Community Action Agency for Washington, D.C., UPO has proudly served the residents of Washington for the past 50 years. Annually, we impact the lives of nearly 100,000 Washingtonians, 100,000 people advancing their education, securing employment, maintaining housing stability, and investing in their communities through volunteerism. Our vision is a Washington of thriving communities and self-sufficient residents. To learn more about our services and how you can partner with us or donate, visit us at www.upo.org. UPO, where we are uniting people with opportunities.
Take Action News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on health care while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. All afternoon. More about me at karlfrisch.com. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Karl Frisch. We've been chatting a bit about food stamps. It's such a huge issue, especially right now here in Washington, our nation's capital. And somebody doing some really great reporting on the subject is Cole Stangler from In These Times. He's joining us now. Cole, thanks for joining us.
Great to be back.
So you've got a really great piece in These Times, and it concerns where we should be looking for the fraud. The title itself gives it away a little bit, looking for fraud in all the wrong places. There's so little fraud in the food stamps program. Where should our lawmakers be looking?
Right. I mean, so this article is looking at part of the spending that was included in the Farm Bill, and the Farm Bill funds both nutrition and agricultural programs. And so if you actually look on the agricultural side of that funding, there's a program, the Federal Crop Insurance Program, that actually is far more prone to fraud than food stamps. And there's a whole variety of different sources of that fraud. I'll just cite one of them, which I think is one of the most blatant ones. And there was actually a report that the GAO came out with last year talking about this program. And so basically taxpayers subsidize premiums for this program. And so when there are farmers that are taking out claims that are more frequent or higher than other farmers in the area, the risk management agency is supposed to notify the farmers they're going to be investigated. But actually this GAO report found that actually about a quarter of those inspections of potential fraud don't even take place, which I think is a pretty high number. And you can imagine, I try to draw the parallel, you think about the Food and Nutrition Service, which is supposed to follow up on potential cases of food stamp fraud. You can imagine just the outcry of, a quarter of those cases of potential fraud not being followed up on. So that's one big area. And there's whole issues of incentive problems that's built into the program, the crop insurance program, that incentivizes fraud.
Well, it's the exact problems that they say exist in the food stamps program. That the incentive is for fraud, not for work. That there are people that are perfectly healthy, healthy-bodied workers who should be working. Can you imagine if we told a corporation that they could have, all the corporate welfare that they wanted as long as they, lowballed the price of their products? So, we've got these folks using SNAP that we're telling them they have to be part of a work service program at like a government facility, where in reality they'll end up making like $2 an hour. Imagine if a Democrat proposed legislation that said a corporation could have the subsidy for the products that they're making, but that they had to sell them for 20 cents.
Right. I mean, and people have said, critics of the crop insurance program and farm subsidies in general will point out, the crop insurance program is not your typical insurance program. It's basically, it effectively functions as a subsidy. It's as somebody who I spoke to who's a critic of the program at Iowa State, a farm policy expert, is, the culture of the program, it's a social program to benefit farmers. It's basically a subsidy. So there's not, it's a subsidy, and there's not incentives to look for whether or not there's fraud.
Well, and what would happen if these subsidies went away?
I don't think that the agriculture interests in the United States would be
whatever let it happen.
Would let that happen.
Right.
So I think this is. I'm not. I could go into the intricacies of farm policy, but basically they have ended the direct payments program, or cut that drastically, and they're expanding crop insurance, and basically they serve the same purpose. You can call it insurance, but it basically functions as a subsidy. And I think that's pretty much here to stay. I think that's the new direction they're taking, is to fund crop insurance more heavily as opposed to the direct payments.
So we know that Republicans are relying on corporate America for the super PACs and everything else that helps get them elected. Obviously, corporate America is relying on these subsidies to pad their bottom lines. Lost in the shuffle here are the way that the policy prescriptions that Republicans are pursuing make them look to the electorate. They're already having a problem appealing to women and independent voters. Do you think basically bemoaning the evils of those unfortunate enough to have to rely on the government for food and sustenance is a winning prescription for somebody who wants to be elected to office?
Yeah, I'm not the right person to be telling the Republican Party what they should be doing, but you would think that there are some major political costs. But that's sort of the calculation they've made, is that there are certain things you can touch and certain things you can't, and they've made a calculation that basically screwing over poor people is something that they've decided to.
Well, it's certainly put on the scale, right? It's can we do this and still make out like bandits with the corporate interests who are funding our campaigns? But at a certain level, the way this is being spun by the Republican leadership is kind of a welfare 2.0 type thing, which is something you covered in another story.
Yeah. This is part of a longer term project here. People from the Heritage Foundation also had a very prominent role in helping craft this bill with Eric Cantor's office. And so this has been a long term goal, is to make it look something like the reforms in 1996 under Bill Clinton, where the idea is you're going to be incentivizing people to work. And they're doing that by cutting. There's a lot of different cuts that are part of this, the food stamp cuts I can get into, but part of that comes from cutting the ability of states to have this waiver that allows basically people in high unemployment areas to maintain their benefits. And the idea is by cutting that waiver, you're going to force them to
pick themselves up by their own bootstraps, incentivize them to get jobs, etc. Cole, would you mind sticking around so we can dig a little bit deeper into this?
Sure, of course.
We've got to take a break. We're talking to Cole Stangler from In These Times about the food stamp debate and everything happening in Washington, more like a food fight. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to WEAT Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
Breast health awareness is critical for all women, particularly African Americans, because we have an increased risk of dying from breast cancer compared to women of other backgrounds. At U of M, I'm doing research here and with women in Ghana to look for an inherited link that makes African and African American women susceptible to a more aggressive type of cancer. Finding this link, I believe, will make new treatments possible. But right now, making sure that you are properly screened is our best protection.
With experts like Dr. Lisa Newman, the University of Michigan Health System is a leader in cancer care. When you call our free Cancer Answer line at 800-865-1125, an oncology nurse will answer any questions you might have about the prevention, screening, and treatment of breast cancer and other forms of cancer. All calls are confidential. Call 800-865-1125 or visit uofmhealth.org/cancer answer line.
We're working to help everyone enjoy longer, healthier lives.
That's the Michigan difference.
As a National Guard or Reserve member, you served your country. Now let VA serve you.
I wouldn't be here today as a successful woman without the help that I received.
Your VA honors your service by providing a wide range of veterans benefits. From home loans to job training, VA benefits can help with some of life's toughest challenges.
What's important about VA benefits is they don't just touch you as an individual. They can touch your parents, maybe your grandparents, your child.
Go to benefits.va.gov/Guard Reserve to learn more, including how to apply online using e-benefits.
I just finished a master's degree recently, and now I'm working on another degree as well. So the military made that all possible. My veterans benefits made that all possible.
No matter what the time is, apply for your benefits. You earn them. VA is ready to help you.
Achieve your next mission. Learn about and apply for your VA benefits today.
Hey, I'm Anderson Cooper. As a parent, you want to make sure that your child knows how to deal with bullying when they see it happening. And chances are they want to help, but they don't really know how. Well, teach them that the best thing to do is calmly walk away, find a teacher or other adult, and speak up. And do your part. Be that adult they can talk to and trust will listen. Join me to help stop bullying. Go to stopbullying.gov to find out more.
The true definition of hero. And being a hero took a heroic effort.
Every day we bring to our fans the world of sports. We speak of heroes and heroism, but there are days when sports matter little and heroes matter more. These heroes don't hit walk-off homers or buzzer-beating threes. They simply made a plan for what to do when disaster strikes. You never know when you might need to be the hero, because you never know if today is the day before a natural disaster. Prepare, plan, be a hero. Visit ready.gov.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune in to the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch, all afternoon, 33 after. More about me at karlfrisch.com. If you're just joining us, we've been talking to Cole Stangler from In These Times. He's got a great piece you should read, Welfare Reform 2.0. Cole, thanks for sticking around.
Thank you.
So one of the things that occurs to me is that if you read the chattering class here, Republicans have been hyper-conscious of the fact that a government shutdown would probably not fare well for them, to the point at which John Boehner has said that it wasn't going to happen, and now the strategy seems to be that they're going to allow a government shutdown so that he can make his point to the conservative base in his caucus that it was a bad idea. Interesting way of doing things, I guess. But, you know, if you talk to most people in Washington that were around during the 90s, they tell you that welfare reform, and I'm only talking about the political optics here, not what ended up happening as a result of, welfare reform during the 90s with Bill Clinton and the Republican Congress is a high watermark in terms of popularity for things that Congress did and that the president did. Are Republicans trying to have their, are they trying to avert complete devastation here by coming up with some newfangled, version of welfare reform?
The policy prescriptions are in line with that. Obviously, the key distinction being the fact that the president, we're, for instance, just talking about food stamps. Even Senate Democrats have said that they're completely opposed to this bill.
Right.
The president has said he's going to veto it. So, I don't think it's actually going to happen. I think we can acknowledge that. But in terms of the actual
policy, are you saying Congress did something that's not going to end up resulting in any kind of law?
Shocking.
Shocking. Absolutely shocking.
Yeah, but if you actually look at the sort of a dream scenario. It's not fulfilling all parts of the dream here to reform and to ultimately dismantle the way that SNAP functions.
Right.
But for one, this has been a long-term goal here, is to separate agriculture spending from nutritional spending. So traditionally, you have, like we were talking about, you have farm subsidies and hunger programs being funded together in the same bill. And the way that works is basically it ensures that you don't cut either of them too aggressively. And if you separate them, having farm spending in one bill and then having nutritional spending in the other bill, then it allows you basically to go after SNAP in a more aggressive way. And so Republicans have succeeded at first at actually separating this. This is the first time this has happened since I think the early 70s when the Farm Bill came into its current form, funding this sort of compromise. And so they've actually gotten the separation, which has been a long-term goal for one. And now they're pushing forward to severely restrict the eligibility of the program.
Well, it's this notion that all these norms in Washington that the Farm Bill would be joined like that, that nobody would ever not extend the debt limit, that the sequestration cuts are so severe that nobody would be able to stomach them. And the answer to every single one of those is this Republican Congress can. They'll jump off the cliff. They'll let the government shut down. They'll stomach sequestration. They'll separate the Farm Bill in half so that nutrition is separate from the farming subsidies. They'll do all these things that the proper people of the Washington Beltway assume is a step too far.
Right. And and I think it's also worth pointing out as well as you have to give them credit for at least shifting the debate. Even talking about food stamps, the Senate Democrats agreed to about $4 billion in cuts. And so when they go to conference, they're not going to be on board with the $40 billion, obviously, but, having that benchmark out there helps shift the debate. If you look at the way that they've dominated the whole conversation about the budget, it's a certain kind of dominant discourse where Democrats are on the defensive, and the broad kind of parliamentary left is also on the defensive. And we're having conversations about just not cutting things, as opposed to actually expanding programs into, trying to push forward with a really progressive agenda.
Is there any effort in the Democratic caucus to be shifting the conversation like that?
Yeah, there are a handful of certain outspoken members of Congress on the issue, but it's also worth pointing out. You don't have a lot of Democrats arguing for instance, there's already going to be people cut off SNAP. They're going to be decreasing benefits because there was an increase as part of the sequester. So you already have that cut happening first. And, you haven't had Democrats going on the record saying that they, are opposed to having that benefit increase expire. So there's one case of already kind of, ceding ground if you want to get into a conversation about strategy. that was a missed opportunity, I guess, if you're a progressive and you want to see Democrats helping to dominate the conversation. They really ceded this to this kind of dominant discourse about the necessity of austerity and being fiscally responsible, as they put it.
So what happens? Okay, they send this. The Senate then votes to strip these provisions and votes to send it back to the House, and then we're back to square one again, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think eventually, you're going to have some sort of compromise here. It's not going to be $40 billion, somewhere between $4 billion and $40 billion. And there's a couple of, for instance, I don't think that the bill is going to include this termination of that state waiver authority that we were talking about. I don't think that's going to happen. But you could see some smaller cuts that are going to be part of that.
All right. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the politics here in welfare reform 2.0, or as it's better known, the debate over food stamps with Cole Stangler from In These Times. Cole, where can people find you online?
You can just go check me out on Twitter, Cole Stangler. Go to InTheseTimes.com. You can see my work on the website as well.
Excellent. Cole, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, this is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. When we come back, we will be joined by Eric Burns, who was a leader in the fight to bring ethics reform to Washington in Congress and the fight against Tom DeLay, and we will chat about Tom DeLay's conviction being overturned. I do not think that means he'll be back on Dancing with the Stars anytime soon. How's that for the second time I've referenced Tom DeLay on Dancing with the Stars today? Absolutely crazy. This is Take Action News, and we'll be right back.
For me, guns are for hunting and protecting my family. I believe in the Second Amendment, and I'll fight to protect it. But with rights come responsibilities. That's why I support comprehensive background checks, so criminals and the dangerously mentally ill can't buy guns. That protects my rights and my family.
Tell Congress, don't protect criminals. Vote to protect gun rights and our families with comprehensive background checks. Demand action now.
Hello, everybody. I'm David Shuster, your host of Take Action News. On our show, we talk government, politics, and what you can do to have an impact. We're nonpartisan, report like hell, and let the chips fall where they may. We feature segments like social media, activists of the week, and the latest news affecting our communities. So join us every Saturday and make a difference. Yes, you and I, we can do this. That's Take Action News on the air, online, and at your podcast convenience on iTunes each week on the We Act Radio Network.
Say you want to go to college. Yay! A Big Ten college. But you don't want to feel like part of the, well, you know. Is there an answer for you? Of course. Indiana University East. Go Red Wolves! Indiana University East. You'll get the quality of a Big Ten education in a small college setting. IU East offers more than 50 fields of study, from accounting to political science, taught by internationally recognized faculty with an average of 18 students per class. So it's not, student number 95A-6273, please report to. It's more like, hey, John, welcome to class. Best of all, you'll graduate with one of the most respected degrees anywhere, a degree from IU. Don't wait. Go to iue.edu. or call 800-959-EAST to arrange a visit to Indiana University East. IU. Focused on you.
We Act Radio is a very proud partner of the Start at Westminster, a harm reduction, prevention, and awareness initiative sponsored by the Westminster Presbyterian Church right here in D.C. START stands for Syringe, Treatment, Advocacy, Resources, Training. These are the core elements of the harm reduction philosophy at START. The goal of this program is to reduce transmissions of HIV, hepatitis, and other bloodborne infectious diseases by empowering those at risk of infection with the tools, resources, and referrals they need to take charge of their health. Over the past year, the Start at Westminster tested over 1,600 people, and they're averaging about 150 tests each month. And of course, with the proper funding, that number could go even higher. For more information on this terrific program, go to www.startatwestminster.org. Or visit the Westminster Presbyterian Church, 400 I Street Southwest, right here in Washington, D.C.
100% success rate in modifying your home. Free consultation. No upfront.
Does this sound familiar? If you're in need of assistance with your mortgage, be careful where you turn for help. Loan modification scammers will offer deals too good to be true. Learn the signs so your life won't be turned upside down. Know it, avoid it, report it. For more information or to report a scam, call 1-888-9950 or visit hud.gov/prevent-loan-scams.
Our children are exposed to violence every day, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, even in their own homes. Exposure to violence can have a devastating and lifelong impact. Through community action and leadership at the national level, we're identifying the children who need our help. I'm Attorney General Eric Holder, and I'm asking those of you who have a role in a child's life to take action. Through your attention and early intervention, we can help children in need to heal, to thrive. Together, we can change their lives and their futures.
Join the Justice Department in defending childhood.
Welcome back. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. All afternoon, you can find more about me at karlfrisch.com or on Twitter, Facebook. Follow me on any of those social medias. So, some bad news this week. A Texas appellate court has overturned the conviction of former House Majority Leader Tom DeLay for allegedly scheming to influence Texas state elections with corporate money. A three-judge panel voted 2-1 to overturn the conviction, calling the evidence, quote, legally insufficient, according to court papers filed Thursday. The decision formally acquits DeLay of all charges, but it could still be appealed by the government. Just hours after the ruling was announced, Tom DeLay visited Capitol Hill for a long-scheduled lunch meeting with members of the Texas Republican congressional delegation. Surprise, surprise, because back in 2010, when he was convicted, this all has to do with him bringing this corporate money into Texas to influence elections to win the Texas state legislature so that they could write better congressional districts that would defeat Democrats and elect more Republicans. The reason I know so much about this is because of our next guest. His name is Eric Burns. He's the former president of Media Matters for America. He's also a former senior advisor to Congressman Chris Bell, who filed the initial ethics complaint against Tom DeLay, which caused all kinds of controversy, and Chris Bell was a victim of the very redistricting that Tom DeLay and his cohorts pushed through with this corporate money. Eric Burns, thanks for joining me. Eric?
Yeah, I said, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. I would also be remiss if I did not mention that Eric Burns is my business partner at Bullfight Strategies. So thanks for joining us, Eric.
No, thanks for having me.
All right, so put us in your shoes, years ago at this point, when Chris Bell was deciding whether or not he would file this first ethics complaint against Tom DeLay.
Well, I'll tell you, it was a climate of fear. There were quite a few folks on the left that had been involved with going after Newt Gingrich for his ethical lapses, in the late 90s, that knew about this, that warned us that we were going to receive death threats and we were going to receive, potential acts of violence, and that this was a serious group of folks that were essentially thugs. Now, that thankfully never happened, but we had to really sit down as a group, the entire staff, and the Congressman Bell in particular, who I think has demonstrated incredible courage and do what nobody else was willing to do, and that was to stand up to somebody that everyone knew was absolutely corrupt in Washington, that was the king of K Street. He was the architect of the K Street project. And obviously we knew a little more because we were, my boss, Chris Bell, represented a district in Houston, Texas, where Tom DeLay is from, which is also where I'm from. It was an attempt to actually really change, to do something bold and to bring attention to this problem and to try to impact some change for the better in the people's house. And I think it was.
So you guys filed the complaint, and then what happens? I mean, the whole political world just kind of exploded.
Well, there had been an unspoken ethics truce between the Republicans and the Democrats for 7 or 8 years before Chris Bell filed the ethics complaint against Tom DeLay. It was like a 147-page complaint that outlined not just money laundering, but also abuse of power, potential bribery allegations. And it was actually not even very terribly welcomed by some members of the Democratic leadership, to be honest with you. But it absolutely shook the Capitol to its foundation. It was a national news story for better than a year. And I think it completely changed the face of the debate. This was in 2004. 2003 is when this started. Ethics complaint was filed in 2004, and it really changed the debate and really dominated the debate in Congress and ultimately in the country leading into the 2006 elections. So when the Democrats took over the House in 2006, the exit polls showed that even with the war in Iraq not going well, the culture of corruption of the Republican Congress was the number one issue that led them to vote the Republicans out of power. And I think it was a direct result of the courage that Chris Bell showed in standing at Tom DeLay. It was a David and Goliath situation.
Well, and maybe, I mean, that's what's so frustrating about reading these stories. I mean, they're all just like, 300 words, Tom DeLay was acquitted. And they mentioned the money scheme in Texas, but they don't talk about him shaking people down on the House floor and telling them, we'll get you X number of dollars into your campaign account if you vote for, this Medicare Part D. And,
That's right.
You'll be stripped of your committees if you don't do this and do that. And
letting cabinet members on the floor, which is against a major violation of House rules, to strong arm members of Congress. There's no discussion right now of the fact that he used Department of Homeland Security anti-terrorism resources for his own political benefit and was ordering the resources that we had at the time to go track down Texas legislators to force through his mid-decade redistricting of the Texas legislature, which resulted in which I contend was illegal, but was the first one in history,
right?
And resulted in, I think, a six-seat net gain for Republicans. And frankly, Karl, has become the model for what Republicans are trying to do now in states across the country.
Well, I mean, it's why institutional conservatives have really been pushing hard to get rid of the Voting Rights Act.
Absolutely, and the fact that they were successful, this conservative led and conservative controlled Supreme Court did essentially strip in Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act is incredibly important, not just because of voter intimidation at the polls or long polling lines, but because the Department of Justice was able to basically have additional control to ensure that voter irregularities were not going to be happening in states and in districts where there was known voter intimidation, which includes illegal redistricting efforts. And that's something that is no longer an issue for Republicans, and I think we should expect to see quite a few more very aggressive redistricting efforts in the coming years to even cement further their institutional majority in the House of Representatives.
I mean, they really don't have much of a choice, right, Eric? I mean, it's either they do what they're doing, or they change the way that they view the issues. They come out for a path to citizenship and immigration reform. They stop harassing gay people and women. But it's a lot easier to try and rig the game, as it were, than it is to switch the entire party's thinking about a variety of issues.
Well, look, this goes back to what I'm a former Republican political operative that realized I wasn't playing on the wrong side, as I know you were too, and it's one of the reasons we worked there for so many years. But you've heard me say this before, but I call this the total war concept of politics. Nothing is off limits. Rewriting the rules, breaking the rules, breaking 100-year traditions that have never even been contemplated, putting the debt crisis that we're about to face again, putting the debt ceiling increase and the U.S. credit rating at risk. It's so incredibly irresponsible. Is all a product of the delay in Karl Rove era dominance over the last 20 years.
Well, and it's funny. We've been hearing this week a lot of people reference the Hastert rule, where Speaker Boehner won't bring anything to a vote that he doesn't have a majority of support from in his own caucus, or that wouldn't pass with a majority of support from his own caucus. They keep on calling it the Hastert rule, but Hastert was one of the weakest speakers in history Wasn't it more the Tom DeLay rule that they weren't going to do anything that Tom DeLay didn't give his blessing to?
Oh, there's no question. I mean, look, Denny Hastert was I believe the longest serving speaker in American history, or one of them, largely because I think he was fairly weak.
He was a puppet.
DeLay was known as the Hammer. He ran the House. It was his house. Many people in Washington considered him more powerful than President Bush, and many very smart people, and myself included. I would say he was at least as powerful as President Bush. He controlled the flow of money from corporations, from lobbyists, and from K Street to members. And I'd say the irony of this appeal is that it's very, very difficult to convict someone on like money laundering charges when it comes to campaign finance. And so we never really expected that he was going to be convicted in a court of law. We're very, very happy that he was. It does not mean he was innocent now that this appeal was overturned.
Right.
He was convicted by a jury of his peers, and then the appeal was overturned by a 3-judge panel, 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat, in Texas. These are elected judges. They are elected. And Tom DeLay is still a very powerful figure in Texas Republican politics.
Oh, they owe everything to him.
That's right. And so it's not exactly a huge shock that this 3-judge panel voted. The 2 Republicans voted to.
I mean, demographically, Texas has the ability would be more Democratic today had Tom DeLay not rigged the system than it was when he started playing games.
Well, no, without question. And so he's built a model that the entire national conservative infrastructure is going to use to try to cement a generational majority inside the House of Representatives. And it's one of the primary reasons that we see such extreme politics coming out of the House that we don't see anywhere else, where we have people doing these seemingly crazy and irresponsible things, and they've taken I don't even know how many votes, Carl, to defund to defund Obamacare, and they've just done it again and passed it out of the House, and it's just they're often
we're at 41,
and it's become the commonplace norm, and that's because these members are the districts have been so gerrymandered to protect and maximize conservative control, both in Texas and in many other states now across the country, that it's almost impossible to get rid of these very, very extreme members. It's crippling the House of Representatives. It's crippling our federal government.
Well, and it's by design at this point. I mean, if they were going to encounter a Democratic administration, their best hope was not to work with the Democratic administration like the Newt Gingrich years with Clinton. It was to grind things to a halt.
Well, look, when you have a party that is dedicated to less government, that believes fundamentally that government is going to fail, then shouldn't be a surprise to anybody in this country that when they get control of government, they are going to ensure that it fails. It's kind of it's the equivalent of putting nobody in this country would think it would be a good idea to put a CEO in charge of a major corporation that hates businesses and hates corporations. Everybody that anyone knows or anyone listening would say, yeah, that's a ridiculous idea, because of course they're going to mess it up. But that's exactly what we've done with the Republicans, and a lot of this started with Tom DeLay. I will give you this though for DeLay, extremely powerful, called the hammer for a reason. He knew how to get things done in Congress. He knew how to pass legislation.
That is something Speaker Boehner cannot do.
Something that Speaker Boehner cannot do. Something that Eric Cantor, who there's a similarity there with, Denny Hastert was the Speaker when Tom DeLay was the Majority Leader, but Tom DeLay ran the House for, I think 12 years or so, in one form or another. Eric Cantor doesn't quite have the same savvy of how to use the inside.
And I would also say that he and the Speaker just don't get along the way that Hastert and DeLay did. I mean, Hastert knew he was in his position because of Tom DeLay. That can't be said for Speaker Boehner. And Speaker Boehner has made commitments to the president and not been able to back it up with votes from his caucus. Eric, we're just about out of time. Folks can follow Eric Burns on Twitter, on the Twitter machine, at @TheEricBurns, and they can also find him and like him on Facebook the same way, at @TheEricBurns. Eric, thanks for joining us.
All right, buddy. Thank you, Carl.
Absolutely. This is Take Action News. I'm Karl Frisch. Big thanks to Rachel and Pete on the boards, and another great show. Go to takeactionnews.com so that you can stay up to date on the show and other things. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook @Karl Frisch. Join my email list, karlfrisch.com, and we'll keep you up to date on the show and other great things as well. Thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you next week.
I'm Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico. Last year, my state became the 12th state to allow medical use of marijuana by patients who are seriously ill. Some people were surprised that a Republican governor supports medical marijuana, but I'm hardly alone. Groups like the American College of Physicians, American Nurses Association, and American Public Health Association have all acknowledged the medical value of marijuana. New research about medical marijuana is coming out almost every day, showing remarkable potential in all sorts of serious conditions, including cancer, AIDS, and chronic pain. But some in government still want to put politics and ideology ahead of public health. To learn more about medical marijuana and what you can do to help, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thanks.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
WPWC 1480 AM. Now get out there and do something.
Welcome to Breaking Through with me, Kristen Rao Finkbeiner, powered by Moms Rising on the We Act Radio Network. We have a really great show for you this week. We're going to talk with Mothers Demand Action for Gun Sense in America about what's going on across the nation and in Washington, D.C. with moving forward responsible gun safety legislation. Then we're going to hear from the Children's Defense Fund about the ridiculous vote in the U.S. House this week to defund SNAP, which is also known as food stamps. Why that vote was penny-wise and pound-foolish. Next up, we hear from Donna Dolan, who played a tremendous role in winning paid sick days for everyone in the city of New York, which had a rippling repercussion on candidates and whether they won or lost their elections. You're going to want to hear this one. Last up, we close with Ashley Warren Boyd of Moms Rising as we hear about the impact of Obamacare, about the Affordable Care Act, why Congress is using it as a political football, and how you can get access to more affordable health care coverage and more consumer protections. Joining us right now is our first guest, Shannon Watts from Mothers Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Thank you so much for being on. Shannon, you just got back from Washington, D.C., where you were marking the 9th anniversary of the shootings at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. A tragic, tragic moment for our nation. And the tragedy continues with an epidemic of gun violence ongoing And still we're waiting for responsible gun legislation like universal background checks to still pass. What was the feeling when you were in Washington, D.C. this week?
Well, more than two dozen moms from across the country joined Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America at the Capitol this week. We were there for several days. Ironically, we came in to listen in on the Stand Your Ground hearings around gun violence, and all of that was canceled because of gun violence in the Capitol. But we spent our days there meeting with legislators. We met with dozens of legislators, urging them to go back to the drawing board and work on background checks again, get those passed, especially in light of the mass shooting on Monday. And tragically, we wake up again today to find out that last night in Chicago, 13 people were shot, including a toddler. So clearly there has to be action on this issue, and in my opinion, it's going to be driven in this country by moms.
Absolutely, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more there. Do you feel that the message is getting through to those elected leaders in Washington, D.C. about how moms across the nation are experiencing the epidemic of gun violence in our local communities, or do you feel like they are muffled by the Beltway, that they're not able to hear? What do you think it's going to take?
Well, a lot of people say to me, what's it going to take to get this passed? I mean, if it doesn't happen when Gabby Giffords, one of their own, was shot, if it doesn't happen when there are attacks on our military bases, or when 20 innocent children are slaughtered in the sanctity of their elementary classes, what will it take? And, I don't know the answer to that except to say it may take some elections, and it's going to take a lot of pressure from moms going in constantly into the offices in their districts and in D.C. on the Hill, and just saying that this isn't acceptable so that they understand that the real Connecticut effect is not what the gun lobby said, which would be that we'd all forget about what happened at Sandy Hook, but the real Connecticut effect is that for the first time, moms are awake and involved in this issue.
Absolutely, absolutely. For those who have just tuned in, we're listening to Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America leader Shannon Watts. Thank you, Shannon, for being on and for all that you do. Now, I happen to follow you on Facebook, and one of the things that's interesting about your Facebook feed is you often post letters that you get from people who oppose responsible gun sense legislation. And can you share with me a little bit about how personal this fight sometimes gets and why you think that the fight sometimes gets so personal?
Yeah, that to me has been one of the most interesting parts. I can tell you that personally, if I were really upset about something that was happening in this country, that I would act on it, and I wouldn't attack people personally. And that has truly been the interesting piece of this. Often, I would say 90% of the emails are frankly from men, and the majority of them include sexist, threats of sexual violence, threats of death, and it is very personal for the opposition, the issue of guns, and I think that speaks to the work of the gun lobby over the last several decades to instill fear in people that something is going to be taken away from them, and that somehow guns are patriotic and they represent freedom. And so I think that what moms have to do is be brave and courageous in the face of that kind of personal attack, and to say, we aren't going to be intimidated or bullied, and we are going to continue to fight, because while they're afraid of their guns being taken away, we're afraid of our children being taken away, and children are much more important than guns. And so, this is a tactic by the opposition that we just have to sort of look past.
And I think you raise an important point here in terms of looking past this tactic, because 90% of the American public, including the majority of NRA members, actually support common sense, responsible gun safety legislation like background checks on gun purchases. Yet, the fear tactics that are used on activists and leaders like yourself are difficult to contend with, and I think make people step back from wanting to be part of the democratic process to push forward legislation that helps us all and takes away gun rights from no one. So I think that it's important to raise that this is happening with you, this is happening with other leaders, and it's intimidation tactics. But it is not what the American public wants, and that is the important thing to underscore, that 90%, again, of the American public do support background checks on all gun purchases. And we have seen already those elected leaders who did vote against background checks actually their opinion ratings went down with their constituents as they voted against background checks. So breaking through that messaging, I think, is one thing that's a super secret superpower of moms, to break through that messaging and say, hey, we're not going to be intimidated, like you just said, Shannon. We're going to keep going, and we're going to fight for not only our children, but the children in every community across America. And as you're in Washington, D.C., and you're sharing that story with elected leaders' offices, what is their response?
Well, the conversations depend on where the legislator stands on the issue. For those on the fence, it always becomes an issue of, this is just hopeless and it's not going to happen, and so therefore I'm not going to act and put myself out in front, which, is certainly not the characteristic one looks for in a leader or a legislator. What we need are people who are willing to go out